Well folks, we're back. After the landmark original generation and the stellar continuation of its second generation, it was time for Pokemon to take a huge leap. The Game Boy was a simple console with a lot of limitations, but the Game Boy Advance shed all of that, and thus the next generation shattered the barrier and swung for the fences. A more ambitious, if questionable story, a stunning leap in the amount of colors that could be presented, a bigger roster of Pokemon as always, new mechanics, and even some gimmicks that were legitimately impossible before. The advanced era was broad. I've covered its middle children, Fire Red and Leaf Green, but let's go back to the first leap forward, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire versions, released in 2002 in Japan and abroad the following year. Through highs and lows, Ruby and Sapphire was an undeniable next step. Ambitious, awkward, clunky, innovative, weird, interesting, and with a ton to see. And while Crystal was my first, Ruby and Sapphire were the games I have more full memories of exploring since I was a bit more cognizant when they came out. And it's been interesting to walk back through its hallways as the wheels of progress shifted Tajiri from the director's seat in favor of Pokemon's de facto face of the series for years to come, Junichi Masuda, whose strengths and weaknesses are perhaps at their respective highest and lowest points here. While I did briefly touch on mechanics changes at various points in Fire Red, Leaf Green, Heart Gold, and Soul Silver videos, I think it's worth running through a few of the innovations and changes applied to us this generation. The most notable and most invisible is the EV system, something I don't know that I covered very well before, and which is perhaps the most contentious change that the advanced generation brought. The EV system is a limiter to how strong a Pokemon can be. In the prior two generations, the stat experience system allowed a Pokemon to keep gaining points in all stats as it continued to battle. While there was an eventual limit, a Pokemon would, with enough time and effort, become more or less perfect with its individual values, which are fixed stats determined when it spawns, eventually losing most of their relevance as they leveled up, due to how wild the stats could get. The EV system limits that stat growth in a number of ways. Every Pokemon gives a small amount of EV points when defeated depending on what stats it's good in. Something like a Pikachu gives speed, for example. EVs cap at 510 total, although each stat maxes out at 252, meaning two stats can be perfectly maxed out with micromanagement, with 6 extra points for a tiny buff to another, which also means that individual values, which formerly only held high impact in the early hours of getting a Pokemon, tend to be far more impactful. For a casual playthrough, this whole system is largely irrelevant, honestly. A real bad IV roll may color a Pokemon as worse than it is to a player, while a good one may color one better, but the game's story opponents are simple in AI and tactics and feature little to no min-maxing. However, Generation 3 is also where Game Freak attempted to solidify the competitive scene, hosting more standardized tournaments in a new format and beginning focusing on designing Pokemon and min-maxing base stats around that scene, something far more apparent in Ruby and Sapphire's sister game. And all that's before we even delve into Natures, a set of 16 text descriptions tucked in a Pokemon summary that secretly boost one stat while lowering another without any real indication they're doing so. The biggest issue with the EV, IV, and Nature systems is a general lack of opacity. None of these systems is directly mentioned in-game, only vaguely alluded to at best. Without a guide and other external tools, getting a competitive-ready Pokemon is basically impossible. Working out what Pokemon give what EVs and what amounts to micromanage them is difficult at best. There's no way to check a Pokemon's IVs, and nobody in the game even alludes to passing down IVs through breeding, something that can also be done with abilities and Natures just seem to be cute flavor text, but are actually pretty wild swings in Pokemon's usability. The process required for getting a perfect Pokemon involves hours upon hours of complicated breeding setup, even more so when digging for specific egg moves, hard number crunching to determine IVs at hatching, a heap of good luck, and hours of EV grinding even before the process of getting a Pokemon to an appropriate level. That means that getting a competitive ready team can take tens or hundreds of hours. Now the comp scene for Ruby and Sapphire is fairly dead, sure, but a lot of these issues continue to be issues for the generations moving forward until rather recently, and they're issues that rear their head more in Emerald, although we can hit pause on that for now. Despite the major, headache-inducing issues that this new system presents, I don't entirely hate it. I wish it was more transparent, less luck-based, and a little more straightforward, but it's also a system that allows a lot of interesting build variety. Min-maxing mixed attackers one way or another, or leaning all into their mixed physical and special stats, playing with speed to optimize just narrowly beating out specific threats, and so on and so on. It's a deep and rewarding system that allows a Pokemon to be truly and wholly customized, and in the following years, when the system leans back a little and becomes more accessible and transparent, it ends up being a huge blessing to the game's variety on a competitive stage. Now let's cover some mechanics that fall into the fun side of things, starting with double battles, which I touched on briefly a few times in other videos, but its missed potential is fairly offensive here. Double battles would, as of Ruby and Sapphire, become the official competitive format for all time moving forward. From here on, moves, abilities, even entire Pokemon are designed for doubles and its unique mechanics. Doubles tricks, boosting with Helping Hand, redirection with Follow Me, skill swap to move around terrible abilities like plus and minus, double targeting to break through walls, spread moves. While singles is definitely my preferred format, doubles brings a ton to the table, and there's maybe 10 in the game total. Granted, one of those is a gym leader and the other is a recurring set of characters fought 3 times, which is cool, but the other 6 or so are optional fights strewn randomly about the game. A number so low that any idea of capitalizing on all the cool stuff Doubles has to offer is a near impossibility. And it's tragic because from having played a decent bit of VGC, I can tell you that it would be very nice to see. I'm not sure about switching to doubles only for single player or anything like that, but a lot of Pokemon are never used because they're doubles mons in a game that occasionally pulls out this newly debuted, extremely integral element of the game. Abilities are also new to Ruby and Sapphire, and they're way more impactful here than they were in Fire Red and Leaf Green. As the Generation 1 and 2 Pokemon were designed before abilities, most got rather common and standard abilities without crazy gimmicks to maintain their playstyles, and this meant outside of the static-filled power plant, there was little impact on how Fire Red and Leaf Green played. The exact opposite is true here. For better and for worse, a Pokemon could be designed with an ability in mind. Most Pokemon at the very least receive strong benefit from them, but also there's a lot of gimmicks. Some great, others not, but it was clearly a generation of experimentation. Limiter abilities that stop regular Pokemon with stats on par with Mewtwo from operating at their fullest potential, protection effects like Wonder Guard, form-changing gimmicks like Forecast, and of course the ever-impactful weather abilities that were the cream of the crop when it came to mixing up the game. I love abilities as an addition, while each Pokemon having 2 adds a slight pinch more RNG when it comes to getting competitive Pokemon ready. The amount of flavor and variety added by the largely simple abilities in the game goes a huge way to making the new roster Pokemon feel fresh and interesting. There's a few new HMs to touch on too as far as navigation goes. Rock Smash was introduced as a field move in Gold and Silver, but becomes an HM here. A simple key to remove rocks, with the only interesting thing being some encounters tied to these rocks. And Dive, a new addition to the Surf roster replacing Whirlpool, which is pretty neat, allowing access to underwater routes where hidden items, rare Pokemon, and even story progress lie. It's a neat mechanic, but being a third water HM with Surf and Waterfall means that it almost necessitates having an HM slave to shoulder Waterfall and Dive, lest your main water be completely devoid of coverage. The last mechanic to touch on, albeit briefly, is the return of the internal clock. Kinda. There's actually only one real feature tied to this. The day-night cycle and time-based spawns are gone, but berries have been greatly expanded and the game pushes them quite hard. Beyond their original simplistic use of healing and curing status, a number of mainstay berries are introduced here, namely stat-raising berries that power up a Pokemon at low health, but beyond this, all berries can be used as ingredients for Pokeblocks, a new snack that can be fed to Pokemon to raise their stats for contests. Cool, beauty, cute, clever, and tough, as well as for a mediocre Safari Zone gimmick. Contests are their own can of worms, one I've frankly never cared much for. The manga and even some other materials kinda present them as a gym alternative, but they don't have any progression or even really tangible rewards tied to them. Even if they did, it's kind of a boring minigame. Not only does it require a ton of berry micromanagement to make good blocks to raise a contest stat level, but said contest stats only affect contests. It's a thankfully transparent system, with clear indications as to what Pokemon contest stats look like, which would be great if the same was done for battle stats, but the move choice limitation is a bigger hindrance. Every move has both a contest category from those listed above, and some kind of effect when used in contests, some of which are admittedly pretty neat, such as ones that get extra points when used last, or contest combinations like Defense Curl boosting rollout next turn, although because contests are monocategory, for example a beauty contest, your move selection becomes extremely limited, and moves that are good in contests won't necessarily be useful in battle. Never mind that you'll probably be messing up your movesets to remain in one category. Getting a Pokemon contest ready isn't nearly as tedious or RNG as getting one battle ready, but battling is a core element of almost every part of the game, where contests are a rather limited minigame, and the fact that you very likely can't use the stuff you're already using hampers it further. It's not like contests are that interesting to play either. The first round is a literal stat dick swinging competition, where you get a chunk of points for having the highest in the relevant stats, while the second is using whatever move is most appropriate in the situation. It's moderately fun and there's a lot of unique effects tied to moves, but being so segmented from the rest of the game and often requiring wasting single-use TMs to build a proper contest moveset never feels worth all the efforts. I can definitely see why people enjoy contests. They're similar to battles, but segmented with their own mechanics, the move combination stuff is really cool, and occasionally need effects and a decent chunk of strategy, but there's so much you need to funnel into getting a Pokemon that most likely isn't useful in the rest of the game. Most ice moves are beauty, and you don't benefit from coverage in a contest. Thankfully, Ruby and Sapphire mostly dodged the ugly bullet that the GBA loved to throw around. A lot of games overcompensated for the GBA's frankly horrible screen with really washed out colors, most notably stuff like Super Mario Advance games, which are more obvious for being ports with butchered coloring. It's hard to say what caused Game Freak to go with a surprisingly rich and saturated palette. Nintendo wasn't doing the same with their own games at the time, although I have a gut feeling that it may have been incompetence on some level, like they genuinely didn't know better. Despite that, the game is full of gorgeous, rich colors in every aspect, the character and monster designs, and the wide and varied world. I've always loved the ultra-saturated Pokemon of the 2D era. The modern games give their palettes a washing so thorough that they'd be at home on any other GBA game. The variety on display in the world is nice, namely the ability to have weather and effects, not dynamically, but they still add a lot. One route has falling ash from a nearby volcano that coats the grass, and whenever the player moves through it, they leave a semi-permanent path behind them as they knock the ash into the air. One route has rain and thunder occasionally, water has reflections, at least for the player, NPCs don't. There's a lot of little detail crammed into every aspect of the game, although I'll come back to Hoenn in a minute. Hoenn's music has always been decisive, although admittedly I tend to lean towards liking it, kind of. Kanto's music was incredibly simple in Shiri's tunes, while Johto's music was a more experimental bit with moodier pieces, slower ones, and even some more intense tracks. Hoenn lands somewhere between. The new hardware allows far more music, which allows more unique pieces. Cheery themes in the early game, intense pieces for the villains and legendaries that are actually central to the game's story now, even entirely unique town themes that are usually pretty reflective of their culture. It's a bit heavy on the brass, or the synthesized brass, and GBA horns are a bit farty, but despite that I think the game has a lot of its own musical flavor that, while a little repetitive, ends up forming a really coherent soundtrack despite the variety. My biggest complaint is that you have to hear the surfing music so much. It's a nice song and all, but I'll get into it in a second. Also, Groudon's main theme is a mega stinker, made funnier by how genuinely great Kyogre's counterpart is. Drought is truly Sonic Chronicles tier, and it's perhaps the strongest evidence that Sapphire was made first and Ruby is a quick adjustment to make a counterpart. Hoenn in the past few years has become a pretty controversial region, to say the least. Hoenn is based on Kyushu, a region of Japan to the south, although rotated 90 degrees to fit the GBA's horizontal display. Relatively warm and semi-tropical, it comprises a relatively large main portion, as well as many islands around it, and is known for its huge volcano and hot springs, all of which are wrapped into Hoenn in various ways. Various other landmarks work their way in too. Slateport can roughly be aligned to Nagasaki. Yeah, that one. Mount Chimey is Mount Aso. Much of the southeast aligns with parts of Okinawa, and of course some more obscure stuff, like Scorched Slab having ties to the story of the goddess Amaterasu. Although I think it's notable that Hoenn takes some pretty strong creative liberty and incorporates many more fantastical elements in the first two generations. Kanto and Johto had some fantastical elements. Places like Whirl Island, Seafoam, and Bell Tower are all based on real places, but feature some fantastical twists. But Hoenn pushes it pretty frequently. Perhaps the most apparent is the large desert in the center of the map. You don't need to be an expert on Kyushu to notice the lack of a massive desert. It kind of poses its own chicken or the egg question. The desert area has a decent handful of desert-themed Pokemon, and I can't tell if they were made to justify an awkward desert area, or an awkward desert area was made to keep some good designs around. The latter cities also push it a bit for me too. Fortree translates a city with a forest and a few bridges into an Ewok village, Sootopolis is a Greek city nestled in a volcanic caldera off the coast of Japan, and Pacifiblog is a raft city floating on a coral reef. It's the first step of many that would slowly undermine the magical realism of the earlier two generations. It's not that I hate everything in Hoenn though. Most locations are quite nice. Slateport sells the idea of it being a bustling harbor despite its relatively small size. The northernmost routes around the volcano have a thin coating of ash that gives them a stillness that's broken by making paths through it. The abandoned ship turned into a habitat for sea life. Even Sootopolis is gorgeous despite its incongruous design. And that's not even touching on small bits of world building. Construction workers digging a tunnel by hand so as not to upset the local Pokemon, a burial mound island that centers many of Hoenn's legends, the space center on Moss Deep, just little things that breathe so much life into the world. The one thing that really needs to address, because it's sort of inescapable in Hoenn, is the water. I don't actually think it's an issue of too much water, but how that water is all lumped in the back half of the game and some of the inherent issues with water. Water routes tend to be fairly dull. You move one direction, there's no consideration of grass or maneuvering around it, no strength puzzles or the like to break it up a little bit, and they tend to feature very slim encounter tables and trainer Pokemon. Trainers use whatever handful of water types are in the region, and the wild tables are whatever 2 or 3 waters haven't been relegated to fishing. The routes in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald are exclusively populated with Wingull, Tentacool, and the occasional Pelipper, plus one single spot where you can get a Wailord. The first two generations seem to recognize these limitations. Generation 1 and its remakes feature 3 water routes, one to the west, 2 to the east, one of these paths which is needed to reach Cinnabar, and the only other mandatory use of surf is to reach Victory Road with a few lakes and ponds for items or a few encounters starting in yellow, while Gold, Silver, and Crystal relegated its mandatory surfing to one mid-sized path to Cyanwood and a few minor lakes and ponds to cross. Ruby and Sapphire's back half is dominated by ocean. Had surf been obtained earlier and had these water routes been more spread out, it might have been fine. But upon beating the 6th gym, it quickly becomes all water all the time. The game features 16 entire water routes, although only 4 of those are necessary for the story, all of which basically come in one gigantic chunk in the late game. Only one of these offers a mix-up to the standard surfing, with one route featuring an admittedly neat gimmick with strong currents to move the player around, which offers an interesting challenge for navigation. There's definitely a world where this could have worked and been a little less clunky, although it would require either more route-specific gimmicks, a much wider encounter table, and absolutely for water routes to be spread out more. But as it stands, it gets exhausting fairly quickly to spend the last third or so of the game cutting through Wingull and Tentacool, who might I add, only share an electric weakness, in sluggish water sections to get around. It's Hoenn's Achilles heel, it's inseparable from the region, tied heavily into its design, and yet so boring it kills the momentum of its most exciting story beats and climax. Ruby and Sapphire actually have probably the simplest of all the version exclusives in the series, in part thanks to all the soft version exclusives. Ruby gets the seed outline with Nuzleaf and Shiftry following, while Sapphire gets Lotad, Lombre, and Ludicolo. Both are found in the same spots, are half grass, with Seedot gaining dark at Nuzleaf and Lotad being half water from the start, and both reach their second stage at 14 and their final by Evolution Stone. Leaf for Shiftry and Water for Ludicolo. Both even feature speed boosting abilities tied to the weather, with Seedot's line having Chlorophyll and Sun, and Lotad having Swift Swim and Rain, which happens to line up with their exclusive game's legendaries. The imbalance is pretty apparent immediately, if for no other reason than Grass Dark being a genuinely pretty bad type, and Grass Water being inherently pretty great. A water type that doesn't fear grass or electric, and a grass that doesn't fear ice. Mauville and Ruby and Sableye and Sapphire are a bit of an odd pair. Both are found in the same spots, both have the same fairly low 380 base stat total, and both are single stage Pokemon. But Mauville is a physical pure steel, while Sableye has the luxurious Ghost Dark typing. Both have strong defensive qualities. Pure steel gives a ton of resistances, while Ghost Dark has few resistances but literally 0 weaknesses. However, despite a few good qualities, their low stats mean they tend to be fairly average at best because they can't capitalize on their stronger points, although Steel's fairly shallow move pool means that Sableye is a little more usable in game. Zangoose Ruby and Sviper Sapphire are probably the oddest pair of the bunch. Their lore ties them together. Zangooses, like the real-world mongoose, hunt and eat snakes, and its immunity ability protects it from poison, and Sviper is said snake. Many of their Pokedex entries throughout the series reference each other, but despite this, they can't have that play out in this game, all because of their version exclusivity. Both have decent stats, but they're both fairly basic to use, and ultimately neither are spectacular. Solrock and Lunatone couldn't be more obvious. I mean, they're very obviously counterparts. Both are Rock Psychic, have Levitate as their only ability, very similar stats, although Solrock leans physical and Lunatone leans special, and the obvious Sun and Moon thing speaks for itself. Lunatone is generally better. It's not that physical rock moves are bad, but Solrock lacks a lot of coverage outside of Solar Beam, while Lunatone is just harder to kill with its buff special defense and has a moderately broader pool than just Psychic. Latios and Latias are the first version exclusive legendaries, kinda. Latios and Ruby and Latias and Sapphire. The two are male and female counterparts of each other, both Dragon Psychic, same ability Levitate, and with their only differentiators being attacking and defending stats are flipped. Latios having higher attack and special attack, while Latias is stronger defensively, with Latios especially being rather formidable for both its high speed and huge special attack. Their version exclusivity has a bit of an asterisk here though, as through the Eon Ticket event, both can be obtained in one version, although I'll get to that later, quite a bit later. Finally, the cover legendaries. Unlike in Gold and Silver, these are a hard either or, and probably the deciding factor in which game to play. Ruby's box art features Groudon, while Sapphire's features Kyogre. Both have a staggering 670 base stat total, both are monotype. Groudon is a ground, obviously, and Kyogre is water. Both are the central thread of the story of their respective games, and most importantly, both have ridiculously powerful weather setting abilities. Groudon's Drought making the battle permanently sun, while Kyogre's Drizzle causes permanent rain. Both of these are ridiculously powerful, and thanks to their ability are very easy to make a full team around, although I will say that Kyogre is stronger here for a variety of reasons, most significantly that rain was, in Generation 3 and for a few after that, the better weather condition in general. It's also quite notable that these games play a lot with soft exclusives, something I wish became more of a standard over increasingly lengthy exclusive tables. Various Pokemon have counterparts similar to Solrock and Lunatone, like Puzzle and Minun and Volbeat and Illumise, who can be found at normal rates in one version, but are extremely rare, as low as 1% in the opposite. It's a nice way to differentiate the games and make trading for the rare one convenient without outright forcing it to be a trade. Ruby and Sapphire start as all Pokemon games tend to, a small town, Littleroots. The moderate twist here is that the player is new to town, having moved to Hoenn from Johto with their mother and father. The local Pokemon professor, Birch, lives here with his family, most notably his child, who takes the form of whichever player character the player didn't select. If the player is Brennan, their rival is May, and vice versa. The two have some moderate differences throughout the game. Brennan's theme is slightly deeper than May's, small bits of dialogue are changed here and there, and there's even a brief point where their teams diverge. In Emerald anyway. It's actually kind of baffling why that happens, and very well could have been that one team was changed at some point and somebody forgot to change the other. After going through the little introduction of the rival, it's time to go on to Route 101. As Hoenn is in Pokemon's Japan equivalent, it uses the 100s and counts up from 1 to indicate its connection to prior regions, and the player finds the bumbling Birch being attacked by a Poochyena. While simple, it's fresh to have a professor with a little more personality, especially after the rather formal Oak and the little more involved but still pretty reserved Elm. This of course leads to the starter choice and battle tutorial, with 3 new starters to choose from. Trico Grass maintains its typing as it evolves into Grovyle at 16 and Sceptile at 36, and it has the standard starter ability of Overgrow, a decent boost to grass moves when below half health. Sceptile is the unfortunate one of the group. Fast as hell and with great special attack, Sceptile's moveset has an unfortunate physical lean. Grass is a pretty awful attacking type, and even with its signature Leaf Blade, a solidly powerful grass move with a boosted crit chance, it struggles to have any offensive presence. It only gets 1 non-grass special move per suit, but is loaded with physical stuff it can barely use. Quick Attack, Fury Cutter, Dragon Claw, Quick Attack, Fury Cutter, False Swipe, which admittedly at least makes it a great catcher, and a wall of TM moves. And this is an issue that only balloons later, as in Generation 4, its signature move even becomes physical as well. It also doesn't quite have the utility that the prior grass types did. Venusaur had a lot of the powder moves so it could spread status and be useful that way, although it didn't have False Swipe admittedly. And Meganium was a pure support Pokemon with dual screens and Leech Seed and stuff, but Trico just does not get a lot to do. Torchic the fire starter is much less unfortunate, at 16 becoming Combusken and gaining the fighting type, and becoming Blaziken at 36, and of course having Blaze, the fire equivalent to Overgrow. The typing not only gives it a nice suite of resistances, but makes it a hell of an offensive force, and its fantastic numbers in both attacking stats make it use both types well, although admittedly being a mixed attacker would come back to bite it a little bit later on, when it probably would have preferred to go all in either way after the split. Its signature Blaze Kick has both an increased crit chance and a burn chance, plus higher power than Sceptile's Leaf Blade because Game Freak is very cruel like that. But it also gets great fighting stuff, especially the new Sky Uppercut and solid coverage like Slash and Aerial Ace, a flying move. Even then, it pales in comparison to the cutest little thing in the room, Mudkip, the water starter, which also evolves at 16 and 36, and gains ground as it moves into being Marsh Stomp and then into Swampert. And these all have Torrent, you can guess what that is. Water Ground is an absurdly good type. Its only weakness, albeit a crippling 4x1, is to the fairly weak grass type. It gets an immunity to electric, and while its resistances are slim, its neutrality to basically everything, especially when combined with a really solidly even stat distribution, great attack and HP, and good everywhere else but speed, Swampert can become incredibly difficult to crack, and that's before considering how great ground and water both are offensively. Not to mention the typical Ice Beam coverage, a solid bit of other coverage like fighting, and of course access to Surf well before the other starters start getting their best stuff. Its signature move, Muddy Water, is a less accurate Surf clone with a chance to drop accuracy, which is neat, but it's rarely a better option than Surf, both thanks to Surf's requirement throughout the game, and its lowered accuracy, which causes Muddy Water to be a little less consistent. As it goes, all 3 starters have top-notch designs, and while there's an obvious winner and loser, as they stand, I can't help but love all 3 of them, both for their appearances and attempts at more min-max design that would become more prominent in later generations. Route 101 is pretty classic first route material, much like the prior 2 opening routes. It has a few patches of grass that are unavoidable going up, but ledges to avoid them when coming back down, and also features a few new Pokemon that very intentionally offer twists on the classic tropes of the early route mammal and bug that the prior 2 generations played fairly straight. The 2 mammals on the route kinda played with the dichotomy that the early route bugs had before, with a cute friendly one and a cool aggressive one. Zigzagoon is the more traditional of 2 and evolves into Linoon at 20, and it's perhaps the most overpowered Pokemon ever designed. Not for its basic normal typing, nor for its passable stats, fast but mediocre everywhere else, although normal stab doesn't hurt, but for its frankly absurd ability pickup. Ruby and Sapphire are unique in how they treat pickup because it was recognized pretty quickly how absurd it was. The next game, Fire Red and Leaf Green, made it only capable of collecting berries, where the games following that would take level into account, with lower levels giving extremely mediocre rewards, and even at 100 giving rewards less obscene than Ruby and Sapphire. After every battle, pickup has a 10% chance to collect an item, a 30% chance that that item is a super potion, which is nothing special but sells for quite a bit of money in the early game, and a 10% chance for the following items: an Ultra Ball full restore, full heal, nugget worth 5,000 when sold, a revive, and most insane, a rare candy, an extremely limited and powerful item that increases a Pokemon's level by 1. Not only are most of these items unavailable until the late game, and even rare candies, there's only about 6 or 7 in the entire game, but all completely break the game's economy when sold, never mind how insane stockpiling rare candies is, starting minutes into the game. And of course, protein can be found at 5%, which when fed to a Pokemon gives them a permanent boost to their attack EVs, PP Ups appear at 4%, permanently raising a move's power points, and King's Rock appears at 1%, a powerful held item that gives many moves a chance to flinch. It's not just viable to run the game as a solo run with 5 Zigzagoons in the back farming candy, but outright broken. Is this terrible game design? Yeah. Is it fun? Duh. It's incredible how something so broken made it past so many eyes. Poochyena, which evolves at 18 into Mightyena, is the cool counterpoint. Pure Dark, it immediately sets itself apart by putting that type into play after how heavily it was limited in Generation 2, but also sets itself apart by being horrible. Poochyena has Runaway, which is a nothing ability, but Mightyena has the incredibly powerful Intimidate. Even better here as it lowers the attack of both opponents when sent out in a double battle. However, everything else is brutal. 90 attack is pretty mediocre, especially for its highest stat, and also Dark is a special type in this generation. And all of its other stats are at least 20 points below that. And I mean, 65 special attack on a Dark. There's better stuff with Intimidate, and even at its best, Mightyena isn't going to be hitting hard or taking hits. Wurmple, this game's early route bug, also plays with the cool cute motif that the early route bugs had in prior generations, but in a very unique way. Wurmple, pure bug, and rocking the typical early route bug ability Shield Dust, which protects it from the additional effects and moves, actually decently strong given that Wurmple in the early game loved Poison Sting. Like its predecessor, is an evolution tutorial. You get it early enough that you'll probably use it some just because you have it in your way, and it reaches stage 2 at 7 and stage 3 at 10. However, Wurmple is both the cute and the cool bug, starting somewhere in between and diverging in its first evolution. Based on its hidden personality value, decided at first encounter, Wurmple has a 50-50 chance of either becoming a Silcoon or a Cascoon. Two virtually identical Pokemon, same stats, same ability, Shed Skin that gives them a chance to heal off status at the end of the turn, and same move pools, although Silcoon is dopey and sad, like Metapod, while Cascoon is purple and angry. These two differ the most in their final evolutions. To this day, Wurmple is still one of very few split evolutions to evolve again. Suicune becomes Beautifly, a bug flying type which has Swarm, Overgrow for bug moves. It has surprisingly good special attack, although it's almost entirely incapable of using that, and like Butterfree before it, its stats are decent in the extremely early game when you get it, but fall off extremely quickly. It's very useless against the first gym, it's very good against the second gym, and after that, it's been completely overtaken. And that's all besides considering that bug flying is probably the worst type combination in this series. Cascoon's evolution Dustox fares a little better. Bug Poison is a better type, and Shield Dust lets it brush off status on paper, although it won't be surviving an Ember anyway. But Dustox is kind of a do-nothing Pokemon. Its defense and special defense are okay, and combined with its ability to throw around Toxic and heal with Moonlight, could potentially be useful, but its other stats are extremely miserable, and it ends up being unable to shake anything after the first 2 or 3 hours. The 3 Pokemon in Route 101 also feed into something kinda interesting. At one point, Ruby and Sapphire were envisioned as a hard reset, cutting out all prior Pokemon and starting fresh, so seeing these blatant twists on old concepts feels like a purposeful choice to usher in the new, even if we know that Ruby and Sapphire wouldn't take its reboot status that far. Oldale Town isn't much of a town. It's more a pit stop, a tutorial for centers and marts. There's nothing visually unique, and the only notable thing at all is that the western exit is blocked on first pass with a guy examining rare Pokemon footprints, which is a setup for a goofy gag where they turn out to be his own footprints. Oldale's nothing more than a connective tissue for the next few areas. Route 103 is designed more or less like 101, grass up, ledges down, but features the first trainer battle with Brendan or May, who in typical fashion use the advantage type starter. The first battle is just trading attacks and praying. You'd have to be kind of unlucky to lose, so I'll just come back to the rival when they have a little more going on, both team-wise and storyline-wise. 103 also introduces a twist on the early route bird concept, one rather fitting to Hoenn's very wet geography, Wingull, which becomes Pelipper at 25. Both are the fairly solid water flying type, same as Gyarados, and have the same rather generic bird ability, Keen Eye. Outside of good designs, the best you can say is that they make for a good surfer and flyer combo. Pelipper is decently bulky, but doesn't hit hard enough to carry battles. It's more utility than function for now, although it eventually gets time to shine. After some this and that, getting the Pokedex and running shoes, which are convenient as always, it's time to make some real headway. Route 102 has trainers in the very first berry trees. I'm going to save berries for a minute, but the game does have a lot of mechanical stuff tied to them, and tries to make collecting them generally important. 102 introduces a decent chunk of Pokemon. Variety here is greater than Gen 2's early routes, and far beyond Gen 1's, and if I had to guess why, it's both a combination of foresight for having to shove in Gen 1 and 2 Pokemon as the game goes on, and an urge to increase complexity in the game as movesets are wider and more varied. Lotad and Seedot appear here in their respective games, Sapphire and Ruby, and both serve as another option for the upcoming Rock Gym. Lotad is water grass and maintains this as it evolves into Lombre at 14 and Ludicolo via Waterstone. Swift Swim and Rain Dish are both great rain abilities, either fixing Ludicolo's fairly low speed or further propping up the great bulk it has, in part thanks to its fantastic typing. While largely a neutral type without many weaknesses or resistances, it's basically the perfect anti-water pick as it's great at turning around rain but is generally hard to kill and hits relatively hard. Its counterpart Seedot makes out much less favorably. It evolves into Nuzleaf at 14 where it switches from grass to grass dark and Shiftry by Leafstone. Chlorophyll makes Shiftry imposingly fast, but Shiftry and Sun don't mesh very well thanks to being incredibly frail and rocking an extremely volatile type with common weaknesses all over. Fire even worse than Sun, fighting, ice, flying. Meanwhile its secondary ability Early Bird is... it's not like you could feasibly run Rest Shiftry, so waking up early is a bit of a last resort for it. Both of its attacking stats are respectable, although given Grass and Dark are both special types, the physical lean is kinda weird. But being so ridiculously frail and having middling speed when not in Sun is a real death blow to its usability. Ralts is a rare spawn here and evolves into Curly at 20 and Gardevoir at 30. For reasons that should be immediately apparent, Gardevoir quickly became very, popular with many Pokemon fans. I've never really gotten the sex appeal element, to be honest. The line is pure Psychic and is fairly similar to the Abra line. Massive special stats? Not much elsewhere. As is typical of Psychics, it gets a fairly wide set of coverage moves via TM and can kinda just blow through anything that's scared of special moves. Synchronize, which gives the opponent whatever status is given to Gardevoir if that happens, can dissuade status that would otherwise cripple or slow down Gardevoir, and Trace is always funny, copying the opponent's ability, although it's very difficult to actually copy one that's useful, especially given that Intimidate doesn't work when traced in this generation. Lastly, the first of the game's many 1% encounters. It's oddly recurring and often pointed to as a general Generation 3 oddity. A solid fourth or so of routes in this game feature 1 and 2% encounters for reasons that are kind of unclear to me. They don't tend to be stronger or more interesting Pokemon to use, and outside of a few neat ideas with soft exclusives, they do often just serve to be pretty annoying. Surskit and its evolution Masquerain are extremely bad, and the 1% encounter rate is hard to justify, with its only saving grace being that Surskit appears on 5 different routes, which makes the odds of stumbling into it eventually a little bit better. Surskit starts promising. Bug Water is one of the better bug combos, and Swift Swim could give it a nice niche. Suddenly it hits 22, becomes Masquerain, and becomes Bug Flying, probably the worst type in the game. And Intimidate can't save it despite how good it is. Some low-end water coverage can't cover such a tremendously bad type and extremely mediocre balanced stats. Petalburg is much more of a town. It has a gym run by the player's father Norman, although he's not the first leader in this game. They actually do a pretty decent job of building up to the eventual confrontation. An NPC in town gives some exposition about Norman and therefore the player coming from Johto, and according to a later game, specifically from Olivine. The first story beat happens here, meeting Wally, a sickly boy who serves as a stealth catching tutorial had you not figured it out already. Lucky bastard gets a first encounter with Ralts. It's not his last appearance, but he's used pretty sparsely. His family becomes a bit more important throughout most of the story as his improved health is attributed to his Pokemon that you helped him catch, and therefore that improvement is attributed to the player. 104 is divided in half through the middle by a forest. The opening half is the first sign of Seas to Come with a nice beach, but is otherwise fairly uneventful. Tailo is a more standard if fairly powerful early route bird, following the traditional normal flying typing and becoming Swallow at 22. Its most standout attribute is the ability Guts, which gives it an incredible 50% boost to its attack when affected by a status condition. Combine that with Facade, a 70 base power normal move that's 140 base power when statused, and 210 base power after stab. Combine that with amazing speed and decent attack, and you have a frail, somewhat gimmicky twist on Fearow that can absolutely stand up to stuff in late game if used optimally, although lack of an easy way to give yourself status can make it a bit frustrating to get it set up, and status always runs some risk, whether that's losing turns with paralysis or taking damage with poison or burn. The route itself is cut in half by the first dungeon, Petalburg Woods, itself being a bit of a twist on Viridian and Helix, although unlike those, it adopts the Route 1 design philosophy, with ledges throughout to get through it quicker after some backtracking that comes up soon, while also having an alternate path accessible with Cut the second time you come through, which offers some items as a reward for forcing that horrible move on yourself, especially as Cut is literally never required to get through the game and only hides a small handful of items. The first Team Magma or Aqua Grunt shows up here, in Ruby or Sapphire respectively, harassing a man in a lab coat, although in his first battle they both use a single Poochyena, and outside of them being rude and obviously villainous for their gaudy attire, we don't learn much about them for the time being, so I'll put the Magma and Aqua stuff on hold. Petalburg has a couple oddballs thrown in. Shroomish is a surprising twist on Paris, the second in a long line of every odd generation mushroom Pokemon with Spore. Shroomish is grass, and evolves at 23 into Breloom, which gains fighting, and both have Effect Spore, which has a chance of dropping a random status on the opponent when they make contact with it. Sleep, Poison, or Paralysis, although both are relatively frail, and grass fighting, despite its many resistances, has a lot of powerful weaknesses to deal with too. Its great attack makes it a fantastic fighting type, although its other stats are fairly low, but it's primarily known for what Parasect is. It can get both False Swipe and Spore, although only Shroomish gets Spore at a very late level, and False Swipe is only available as an egg move. At the end of the day, with some work, Breloom is basically the ultimate catcher hands down, and a fairly powerful fighter in its own right, but it needs a lot of work and effort to make it successful in that role. Slakoth is the first ability-based Gimmickmon in the series. It's pure normal and evolves into Vigoroth at 18 and Slacking at 36. The first and last stages of the line share Truant, a negative ability that only allows them to act every other turn, meant to be a cap on Slacking's ludicrous power. Its 670 base stat total puts it on par with this game's legendaries, and all of its stats, except for special defense, are pretty ludicrous. 160 attack puts it second only to Deoxys' attack form. Its downside can make it rather difficult to use, although Hyper Beam is effectively free as it has the same downside as all of Slacking's moves, making it effectively a free delete button on anything that isn't a Ghost, Steel, or Rock. It also has a signature move in Slack Off, which is a recover clone, healing 50% of HP. Vigoroth uniquely abandons the gimmick for a time, instead having Vital Spirit, which prevents sleep. It's actually a fairly good physical attacker for how early it can be obtained, and is much less difficult than its predecessor and its evolution. The upper half of Route 104 has the Pretty Petal Flower Shop, which is as good a time as any to discuss berries. Berries are a bit more complex than they were in the prior generation, a blessing and a curse. As opposed to the fixed trees that regrew daily and gave the same berry every time, berries can now be planted in soft earth located on most routes and have different growth times, can be watered to produce greater yields, and have many more uses. Not only have the more complex berries been introduced, like stat boosting berries, but certain abilities interact with them too, and berries now have contest stats. They can be turned into Pokeblocks to improve odds in contests. It's a gigantic pain to manage. The berry cycles are all in 3-hour increments, but 12-hour spaces are never convenient. Even worse, coming back every 3 hours to water the fuckers to actually make the berry a profit. I don't mind management elements to a point, but I've never really been much for contests, so beyond getting enough blueberries for a certain evolution, I've never really bothered. Although getting good at contests requires getting really deep into the berry stuff. North 104 also features the double battle. As I said before, these are very sadly underutilized. Rustboro roughly aligns with Kyushu's capital, Fukuoka, and it shows. Governmental structures don't come up often in Pokemon, but coming from the quaint grassy towns before, Rustboro couldn't feel more grand. Paved streets and cobblestone walkways, apartments, and the Devon Corporation, sort of Hoenn's equivalent to Sylph. Devon develops tech throughout Hoenn, including the new Pokeballs seen here, like the extremely limited Dive Ball that works better on Pokemon found underwater, the Timer Ball that gets stronger the longer a battle drags on, which is an incredibly powerful Pokeball, and the Repeat Ball that makes it easier to catch something the more times it's been caught before, good for shiny hunting and a few other niche scenarios. Rustboro may be my favorite town in all of Hoenn. It's a classy mid-sized city with no hustle and bustle, just a simple spot that feels big without being a mess. The player can trade a Slakoth for Makihita, although Makihita can also be found shortly after. Makihita is pure fighting and evolves into Hariyama at 24. Makihita is a hard hitter for a first stage, but Hariyama brings it up a notch. Its massive 120 attack makes it a heavy hitter, and its equally massive HP means that even with all of its other stats being pretty bad, it can usually tank a few hits, although it's a retaliatory revenge killer over any kind of lead because of its very low speed. Guts also gives it a lot of utility, especially because its incredibly low speed and high health leaves it very vulnerable to status, but Thick Fat is perhaps even funnier as it adds an effective resistance to fire and ice. It's not that it's overly relevant, but when it comes up it feels very good. It also has 2 entire signature moves. Arm Thrust is a decently strong multi-hit fighting stab, and Smelling Salt is a mid-power move that deals double damage to and cures paralysis. Hariyama is strong enough to sometimes kill outright with this, but it doesn't exactly have an easy time spreading paralysis itself. Rustborough's gym is Rock type. As with Brock, Rock is a decent tutorial type thanks to interacting with all 3 of the starters types, but they also clearly learned from the mistake that made the battle miserable for Charmander in the first generation. With a bit of grinding, Torchic can evolve and gain a rock neutrality and the decently strong double kick, although rock types tend to lean very physical. But there's plenty of other options too. Mudkip and Trico handle it themselves, C-Dot, Lombre, and Shroomish are pretty obvious. There's also the Makihita trade, plus the TM for Bullet Seed is available outside of the flower shop, which a good handful of Pokemon can learn, and that's before the less conventional picks. Ralts and Poochyena both have special moves that hit rocks on their weaker side, their special defense. To a point, more options is better, and the game makes the options all viable and plentiful enough to try to get the player to think about strategies for cracking big walls instead of turning purely to grinding. The breadth of options makes it way easier to introduce the increased complexity that the game has brought in the same way that Caterpie once introduced evolution, and Slackoth introduces abilities in a very obvious way. The gym layout exactly matches Brock's, a straight line with 2 trainers and 2 bends to avoid them, although dodging free experience this early is kinda stupid. Leader Roxanne directly mentions that she graduated from Rustborough's trainer school. There isn't actually anything there besides a free Quick Claw, admittedly a great item, but it's neat that she's more than just gym leader. She uses Geodude, something fairly familiar at this point, but follows it up with a killer ace, Nose Pass. For our first leader's ace, it's nearly 400 base stat total, 135 of that in defense alone, can make it a pretty hardy wall, and Rock Tomb, a fairly hard-hitting 60 base power move before stab that comes with a guaranteed speed drop, means that she's no slouch attacking either. While she never feels as impossible as Charmander Brock can be in Fire Red and Leaf Green or Red and Blue, it's a nice first lesson, and even with Trico, it can catch you a bit off guard for just how bulky Nose Pass is. Immediately upon exiting the gym, a Team Magma or Aqua Grunt runs out of Devon with some stolen parts and heads north to Route 116. You kinda go to routes in a weird order in this game. You could technically go here before fighting Roxanne, there's nothing stopping you, although the new Pokemon up here aren't incredibly helpful for that fight. There's a hedge maze on the north side of the route that leads to a few optional items and berries, so getting to use Cut for something is neat, even though you probably still don't want to use Cut all that much since it's not required. Nincada is a wholly unique mess of an evolution family, consisting of 3 entirely different Pokemon. Nincada is Bug Ground with Compound Eyes, which increases its accuracy slightly with all moves, and evolves at 20 into Ninjask, but if the player has an open party slot when it does so, it simultaneously also evolves into Shedinja as a 2-for-1. While Ninjask is unfortunate to be Bug Flying type, its solid attack and nearly unmatched speed can make it extremely deadly, especially as Speed Boost ensures it will outspeed anything after 1 turn, and with both Sword Stance and Baton Pass on its side, can be used to quickly and easily set up any physical attacker in the game given some dedication and grinding it up to be able to do so. The bad typing and general frailty hold it back from being useful itself, but it's unmatched as an assist for less flawed Pokemon, especially if you're running like Blaziken, Swampert, or something like a Slacking. Shedinja, on the other hand, is an NPC's worst nightmare, and one of the funniest gimmick Pokemon ever designed. Wonder Guard prevents Shedinja from being hit by attacks that wouldn't be super effective. Being Bug Ghost, this means Shedinja can only be harmed by Flying Rock, Ghost Fire, and Dark. A small but solid pool that means it's usually not safe without some setup first. Although many AI opponents use pretty limited movesets that mean they can never harm Shedinja. Shedinja, of course, can still be hurt through other means: Burn, Poison, Sand Hail, Spikes, Curse, and Confusion damage primarily, plus struggle in a real grind game. To balance out this frankly insane ability, Shedinja's health is permanently set to 1. It will, without fail, die in 1 hit, unless it has Focus Sash where it will take 2. You could also technically pass Sturdy onto it, which would make it unkillable by anything except multi-hit moves and status moves like Burn. With a well-planned runway, Shedinja is basically unstoppable, but 1 wrong move and it's over. Wonder Guard also has its own legacy beyond Shedinja, as in doubles, passing it on to Pokemon with stronger types and, health above 1, can make some near unstoppable monsters, which has been a long-enduring doubles tricks with mixed results. Whismer's line is a series of odysseys, evolving into Loudred at 20 and Exploud at 40. The whole bunch are normal types that are focused on sound moves. Beyond the designs, all three share soundproof, which protects them from sound moves, including the fairly relevant Roar and Sing, and also learns many of these moves, seemingly being built around using Uproar, but whether it was because of foresight for the split or something else, Exploud ends up with decent but not extraordinary stats in both attacking stats, good HP and terrible stats everywhere else, leaving it as an awkward, generally bad Pokemon that can land an occasional decent neutral hits. Finally, Skitty is a goofy little thing, and maybe the cutest Pokemon ever, and evolves into Delcatty via Moonstone. Delcatty has a sort of soft gimmick. Q-Charm is a decent ability with the chance to give a Pokemon of the opposite gender that attacks it Infatuation. A soft status condition that gives them a 50-50 chance of not attacking every turn, which definitely boosts Delcatty's survivability. Delcatty's stats are outright bad, and pure normal isn't doing it any favors. The gimmick instead seems to center around using Assist, Skitty's signature move which can call any of your other party members' moves at random. With some proper team building that uses moves that Assist can't call, it can actually make some pretty wild sets, but it's both a ton of dedication to a wonky gimmick, and Delcatty is bad enough that even at its peak it's still pretty prone to fail. Skitty also happens to be another one of Hoenn's obligatory extremely rare spawns and only appears here, although it can be encountered as a swarm in the postgame, which boosts its rate to 50%. One issue though, they forgot to program swarms to end. If a Skitty swarm spawns on this route, then for the rest of the time, 50% of encounters will be Skitty, and there will never be a swarm elsewhere. There are no swarm exclusive Pokemon, thankfully, so it's not game breaking, but still it's a reminder that in some ways, Game Freak never changes. Inside Rusturf Tunnel is the Team Magma or Aqua Goon holding a Wingull named Pico hostage. Outside of this event, the tunnel is important later. The tunnel is blocked by rocks that one man alone is trying to remove by hand, adorably because of the environmental concern for the Whismer that populate the cave. Despite otherwise being a straight line, Hoenn's weird non-linear pathing and fly being obtained so late means that this actually serves as a valuable shortcut to much of the early game, although that's all for a little bit later. Verdanturf town is blocked off by the rocks in the tunnel, no way forward to the north. Hoenn begins its weird and winding path through itself. No complaints, the first half is relatively compact. Later on, Rusturf serves as connected, as do other paths that make moving up, down, and around relatively quick. Meeting back up with the Devon employee, the player is introduced to the boss, who asks the player to take a letter and the parts to his son in Dewford. Access to the upper areas of the Devon building also give access to the guy who made the fossil regeneration machine, although that's not exactly relevant right now. As thanks for saving Pico, his owner Mr. Briney, who happens to be a boat captain operating off of Route 104, offers a ride to Dewford town. Dewford is a quaint island town. While it's not elaborately designed, the comforting beachy vibe and its handful of citizens make it one of Hoenn's nicest areas. A woman in one home talks about adjusting to the simpler life of Dewford. The Trend House is a house crowded with people who will take your word that whatever stupid phrase you toss out is what's hot on the mainland, and fishermen line the shore. The old rod can be obtained from one and opens up a small handful of water options, off the shore itself and on most sea routes. Tentacool and Magikarp are available here and on basically every sea route. Tentacruel is still a very solid bulky water type with a solid water poison typing, and Clear Body is a great ability, even if Liquid Ooze is not quite to that same level. And Gyarados, when it evolves from Magikarp, is incredible as always. Intimidating a great type, plus fitting its inspiration, those stats. Meanwhile, lakes and ponds in the inner parts of the region offer up Goldeen. When it evolves into Seaking at 33, it becomes an okay if unimpressive water. One of the biggest issues with water types in this game is that there's really no short supply, so things like Seaking don't really stand out. There's a lot of Pokemon that just kind of get drowned out in the sea of water. On the edge of Dewford is Granite Cave. Its lower floors are darkened, although honestly the cave is simple and straightforward enough to bump through it without flash, and that HM only comes up one more time very late in the game. The cave is positively stuffed with Pokemon. Zubat, Abra, and Geodude return from Kanto. Zubat is a lot of effort, but at least this time you don't get cock-blocked out of using Crobat, who's still pretty solid. But it's a bit hard to justify given how good Swellow and Petalburg can cover the flying role in this game. Abra is as solid as ever, although it has two major issues. It fills roughly the same pure psychic special focus niche as Gardevoir, and after its first evolution in Kadabra, it's stuck there unless you've got a buddy to turn it into an Alakazam for you. Geodude has much the same issue. Getting to Graveler is easy enough, but trading for Golem is situational at best. Even then, this line has always struggled a little bit with its rock ground typing and speed. Makuhita also shows up in the wilds here, as do a number of new Pokemon for Hoenn. Aaron is Steel Rock. Much like Dark, the Steel type is also getting its time to become more and more accessible, as it basically wasn't in Gen 2. At 32 it becomes Lairon, and at 42 it becomes Aggron. Aggron is one of the final Sugimori-style Kaijumons in the same vein as Nidoking and Rhydon. Sadly, of course, as he'd begin to step back from hands-on design stuff more and more. Neither Sturdy or Rockhead are much of abilities in this generation. In Generation 3, Sturdy specifically protects exclusively against one-hit KO moves, of which I'm pretty sure exactly one trainer actually uses, and Rockhead removes recoil on exactly Takedown and Double Edge for Aggron, which is two decently powerful moves whose normal typing isn't very valuable coverage for them. Steel Rock ends up being one of the more vulnerable combinations for Steel. A 4x weakness to both ground and fighting can be pretty devastating despite its incredible defense, and gets even scarier next generation when those types get special moves. The 2x water weakness is only concerning because, look at the map of Hoenn. Its great attack makes it fairly formidable, especially because Rock is generally good offensively, but it also gets Iron Claw, some expected coverage like Earthquake, and as the Kaijumon tend to, for some reason it gets Surf, which, while not useful, is very funny. Their low special defense holds it back undeniably, but it's rather fun to use when working around its weak points. Two more of the exclusives show up too, both very unique little guys. Ruby has Mauville, Pure Steel, the very first one. Even monotyped, Steel is pretty fantastic, and Mauville gets two great abilities too. Hypercutter prevents attack drops, which is always relevant because wild Pokemon love to spam Growl and there's quite a few Intimidators in the region. Mauville also desperately wants to hold on to whatever attack it has. Speaking of Intimidators, Mauville can also have Intimidate, and it's Intimidate. It quickly gets unfortunate though when you look at its stats. 85 attack and defense and 50 or 55 in everything else. Slow, frail, not particularly hard hitting, Steel can give it a bit of longevity by being so ridiculously strong, but it's really just baffling why they cursed it to be so bad beyond that they stuck it so early in the game. Sapphire instead gets Sableye. Kenai is a useful if situational ability, but it has the same terrible 380 base stat total as Mauville. Mediocre at best physical stats, bad special stats, and horrible HP and speed. However, its Dark Ghost typing has the incredible property of lacking weaknesses and having 3 immunities. Against certain matchups, and with a little setup, the adorable little goblin can become a surprising menace. Not to mention being the best target for Wonder Guard swapping, as it becomes extremely difficult to deal with despite its stats. At the back of Granite Cave is Steven, son of Devon's president and Hoenn's champion. He just tells you to deliver the Devon goods to Slateport for now, and is frankly not very interesting outside of a very cool design. Dewford's gym has always been kinda strange. The puzzle, so to call it, is just that it starts out dark, but more of the room is revealed with each trainer defeated. It doesn't really relate to the training gym theme or fighting type in any way, beyond Brawly being the leader that gives out Flash, and the maze is too easy to make the gimmick interesting. This gym can also technically be skipped until it's necessary to unlock the 6th gym, although given you won't have Surf or Fly, it's extremely inconvenient to do so. Brawly's Machop and Makihita are both relatively hard hitters for this early on, especially with the way fighting moves crack so many common Pokemon for this point. Zigzagoon, Poochyena, Aeron, Mauville. Although the game remains pretty fair, Beautifly and Dustox are both nearly untouchable in this fight, Wingle's very decent, Taillow can be surprisingly strong, although especially in Sapphire, both Pokemon are nearly incapable of damaging Sableye. Only Makihita can even hit it, and only with its extremely weak knockoff using its extremely weak special attack. Brawly can definitely be an issue for some teams, but the game does a really good job of keeping the early game fair with so many options, while also encouraging some really interesting Pokemon to be played by making them strong in relatively niche scenarios. With everything on Dewford wrapped up, Briny drops the player off on Route 109, a relaxed beach route. It's something entirely new. We've seen forests, caves, and cities, but Kanto's sea routes were bordered by nothing, and Johto's beach was a sand pit, less so than a beach. The umbrellas in Surf Shack give Hoenn a bit of its own identity. Kanto is sleek and modern outside of its edges, and Johto is steeped in tradition. Hoenn is a destination, vacation-y, laid back. The multitude of trainers here are just enjoying some casual battling, and everything feels nice and simple. Slateport, by contrast, is rather busy, the busiest town in Hoenn and Pokemon's version of Nagasaki, which probably means Unova nuked it. It serves as a large port city with most of its landmarks centering on that. A shipbuilding plant, an oceanic museum, a port, but also representing the trading portion of all that, with a large outdoor market, which has some secret base stuff, TMs, and vitamins. Nothing crazy, but a fun little area to give the city its own vibe. The fan club is here, although without the bike voucher it's not as exciting. You do eventually get the Soothe Bell here, which is a pretty good item that boosts friendship and makes Pokemon like Crobat easier to obtain. The contest hall here is for the Hyper Rank, so it's impossible to enter on first pass, although the Pokeblock machines are up and running, which is also mostly useless right now. The Pokeblock minigame is whatever. It's just a short timing based minigame, clicking when the arrow gets near your corner. The NPCs in the contest hall can throw berries in too and will help blend, but it seems to have relatively low impact beyond making the berries less focused in one stat, usually coming out at a similar level and feel, which determine how much the stat is raised and raise the counter towards maxing it out to prevent abuse respectively. Over the link cable, it's also possible to blend with another player, which actually can make substantially stronger berries, although you don't actually need to min-max that hard to be successful in contests. Upon entering Slateport, Captain Cern's right-hand man will tell the player to find the captain to give him the Devon parts, and he's located inside the museum, which happens to be overtaken by Magma or Aqua. The grunts you fight are nothing special, but it serves to introduce the team's leaders, Maxie for Magma and Archie for Aqua, although in either case they just issue a vague threat and scurry off without the parts. Both the leaders have basically the same thing going on. They give long-winded speeches about how their master plan will improve the world, dodge every fight, and refuse to understand why they're obviously stupid. We'll get to all of that extremely soon. Once Cern gets the parts, that's it. It comes back later, but it's kind of a dead plotline for now. Route 110 is one of the coolest routes in the game, just absolutely packed with stuff. The route acts as a hybrid bike path and regular route, with a lower route that's filled with grass and an upper route that can only be accessed with a bike a little bit later, loaded with trainers. Unlike the prior bike path, the player isn't dragged down, but there is an associated minigame for navigating the path without crashing, going as fast as possible. The route connects back to Route 103 via Surf, which later in the game acts as a shortcut between the west and east halves, although it's never one that's overly relevant. The trick house on this route is one of my favorite little gimmicks ever put in a Pokemon game. Periodically, the Trick Master will renovate the house to utilize a new puzzle element, or HM, and create a simple maze puzzle that can be solved to get some great rewards, like a PP Max or the Magnet held item, which boosts all electric moves. Each of the puzzles is a bit like a gym puzzle, and while they start out fairly plain with a simple tedious cut maze, some like the doors that alternate open and close when a button is pressed, a strength puzzle, a reused element from Fortree's gym, which I'll get to later, and the spin tiles and slippery floors that are mostly featured in earlier games are all great little puzzles to kill time. They're unlocked after every few gyms, so it can be kinda hard to remember to go back between everything else, but I enjoy that the puzzles are allowed to go pretty gloves off because the trick house is completely optional. Even legendaries usually have kids gloves for their puzzles and dungeons out of fear that they'll be too hard to get to the good stuff. The rival battle here is notoriously difficult, even with the starter only at level 20. They'll still probably be a little bit above you, and with the starters hitting their second stage, they become rather deadly, especially Marshstomp's Mud Stop and Combusken's Double Kick, which both deal with the early game stuff you'd be using rather well, not to mention your Marsh Stomp will probably have a 4x weakness to Grovile's grass attacks like Absorb, which also heals it. The other two Pokemon come from a pool of 3, with them ignoring the one whose type matches their starter. Shroomish can be extremely volatile, with Effect Spore, Sun Spore, and Leech Seed, any of which can force switches and cripple Pokemon for the extremely difficult starter. Wailmer, Pure Water, is rather bulky, which allows it time to get up to speed with rollouts, which can be pretty devastating itself, and Numel, Fire Ground, is also quite the wall, although its pitiful moveset means it typically isn't a huge threat. Marshtomp especially can be a run killer when Mudshot goes off, but even Sceptile's relatively soft team is scary because of an over-leveled Grovile outspeeding and devastating the 4x weak Marshtomp with Absorb, and Pursuit can be rather strong counter to switching out. If you think it's neat that this fight is really tough, I apologize because it's basically over for the rival from here. 110 is also quite stacked for Pokemon. The Oddish line becomes available here. Vileplume and Blossom both get a good boost in Ruby from being able to slot into Sun teams, although Hoenn has a few grass types that are substantially more interesting to use and new to this game. Electrike and its evolution Manectric, which it becomes at 26, are rather standard little electric types. Static and Lightning Rod are basically standard on electrics. Static is rarely useful thanks to Thunder Wave making paralysis guaranteed instead of an awkward dice roll on getting hit, and Lightning Rod doesn't have an immunity in Generation 3. In doubles, Manectric would just take a lot of resisted electric damage if it came up. Fast, good special, mediocre everywhere else, Manectric couldn't be more standard if it tried, outside of Bite being a special move here, which is a nice benefit to it. While not evolutionarily related, Plusle and Minun form an obvious pair and serve as this game's Pika clones, even acting as soft exclusives, with Plusle being fairly common in Sapphire, while Minun is at a paltry 2%, and vice versa for Ruby. Much like Pichu was to the baby mechanic, they exist to showcase doubles, and a few of the double trainers in this game use it as a strategy, although the general lack of double battles in the game makes them completely non-viable for players. Both are pure electric, and Plusle has Plus, which boosts the special attack of the Pokemon with Minus, exclusively held by Minun, by 50%, while Minun has Minus, which boosts the special attack of the Pokemon with Plus, exclusively Plusle, by 50%. Their synergy is pretty obvious. Plusle is moderately better as its stats lean towards attacking, while Minun leans defensive, but without the significant boost provided by their ability and moves like Helping Hand, both are pretty terrible, especially when stacked next to Manectric on the same route. Not to mention the massive, earth-shattering hole in their strategy, Earthquake, which hits all Pokemon in the field, is extremely powerful and common, and is 2 times super effective. It's unfortunate that the first showing for a double-centric strategy is so decidedly not very good. Gulpin and Swalot, yes I know, D's, are odd little fellows. Both pure poison with evolution at 26, they seem to be a response to Grimer, but without the more direct pollution theming, although they seem largely to be built around a mediocre gimmick. A trio of awkward moves, Stockpile, which can be used up to 3 times to generate counters and build up defense, Spit Up, which deals damage based on how many stockpiles are stored, and Swallow, which does the same but heals the user. An interesting, but undeniably extremely slow strategy. While not the only Pokemon to learn these moves, it feels intentional given their designs and how early they learn them. As for abilities, Liquid Ooze is situational at best given that Absorb moves are relatively rare, but Sticky Hold is rather good, preventing a Pokemon from having its item stolen or knocked off, something which is pretty common in a competitive setting. As it is, Swalot's bulk is pretty incredible, and Poison is a great defensive type. It can sit on Toxic, throw out some decent Sludge Bombs, and most importantly, with leftovers and Protect, can actually back up its Toxic Sol strategy, which makes it decent in slower situations. Route 10 has one more cool thing on it, but that comes a bit later, so it's finally on to Mauville. Mauville feels a bit in between, paved roads but still a rather quiet town. The owner of the cycle shop in town will gift the player a bike after being impressed by how far they came on foot. A little cheesy, but the choice of 2 bikes is great. The Mach bike is significantly faster to the point that it actually becomes pretty difficult to control, something that's used in later puzzles to test the player's skill with it to great effect, and it can also be used to climb up muddy hills to reach a few secret areas. The Aqua bike, on the other hand, is simple and breezy, barely faster than running, but gains the ability to do tricks, which lets it cross narrow rails to reach its own unique areas, and a bunny hop, which lets it generate encounters in place without moving, as well as climb up a few ledges in a few certain places. The player can come back at any time to switch bikes, which is a neat way to evolve the exploration by returning to old areas with different bikes. The game corner also returns here with the typical roulette and slots. Thankfully, there's no Pokemon available here, but there are some rather powerful TMs up for grabs, like Flamethrower, Psychic, Ice Beam, and Thunderbolt. I'm not much of a gambler, and thankfully these powerful TMs can be found in the world later, but it's always nice that they're made repeatable here. Wally finally reappears here, his health greatly improved thanks to his time with his Ralts, and he even asks for a battle. He sends out a single level 16 Ralts. You will stomp him. But that's kind of the point. His uncle even comments on it. Wally is feeling so good he's pushing himself too far, but Wally is determined to follow in your footsteps and become strong enough to take on the gyms, which is cute if nothing else. The Mauville Gym's gimmick is a bit weak, although compared to Surge's Electric Gym, it's a godsend. Buttons on the floor, switch electrical barriers on and off to make a simple maze, but with only 3 buttons it ends up being a little too simple. Watson, if the name wasn't enough of a hint, is the electric leader. Magnemite and Magneton especially can be pretty tough to deal with given their newish steel typing, although ground options, namely Geodude and Marsh Stomp, break this fight. Marsh Stomp is basically invincible, with his only real recourse being Sonic Boom to slowly whittle them down and his Voltorb self-destruct. I enjoy the fight and love Watson's bubbly design, but it does feel odd he doesn't use Electric or Manectric given the route we just left. Defeating Watson gives the player the ability to use Rock Smash, which unlocks one Pokemon all the way back in Granite Cave, Nosepass, Roxanne's ace. Pure Rock is an okay type, but its abilities are maximally situational. Sturdy is sturdy, which doesn't do anything this generation, but is good later, and Magnet Pull prevents steel types from switching out against it because, you know, it's a compass. Which comes up, but Nosepass doesn't exactly love taking hits from steels and often can't do very much in return. Despite being rather intimidating as a first boss, Nosepass is pretty frighteningly bad. Its defenses are both massive, but its other stats are so ludicrously bad that it becomes quickly unusable. Mauville exits in every direction. We came from the south and the east is blocked by a wall of water. Heading west is 117, a comfy route with a few gardens and the daycare center. The route has a fairly straight path east to west that makes it extremely convenient for egg grinding, and the breeding mechanics are as obtuse and bizarre as ever. Outside of a metric ton of trainers, perfect for prepping for Watson if behind a bit, the route is fairly stacked too with a good handful of Pokemon. Firstly, Marill, which evolves into Azumarill and has a new pre-evolution, Azurill, which can be obtained by breeding Marill or Azumarill with a sea incense. A sort of awkward held item that exists to explain why Azurill wasn't around in the prior generation, and which itself becomes Marill with high friendship. Unlike its pure water evolutions, Azurill is normal for some reason, not that you would use its baby form regardless, especially since you can bypass it by just breeding into Marill. It's even more so than the Generation 2 babies, pure dex filler. Both of Azumarill's abilities are really solid though. Thick Fat isn't typically that useful as it already resists fire and ice, but resisting better never hurt anyone. Meanwhile, Huge Power doubles its attack. Well, Huge Power does use the true attack, which takes into account IVs, EVs, and natures, which is just a benefit for it. This does mean it has a roughly 100 base attack, which is pretty solid for how easy it is to get, although it can't properly use all that attack yet. It just needs a generation to go. Outside of that, Azumarill is a respectably bulky water type, although again, it's a Pokemon competing in the most competitive type in the series, let alone in this extremely wet game. Volbeat and Illumis work similarly to Plusle and Minun, less so in some ways, more so in others. Their synergy is much less direct, but they share a similar philosophy with their soft exclusivity, and unlike Plusle and Minun, Illumis's eggs can hatch into Volbeat, and starting in Generation 5, Volbeat's eggs can hatch into Illumis, with the pair being gendered counterparts to each other. Outside of Helping Hand, the two are basically their own Pokemon though, with very little double synergy. Volbeat has Illuminate, the first ability to have an effect outside of battle, which doubles the encounter rates, something you very rarely want, while Swarm is Overgrow for Bug. Volbeat is statistically mediocre, flat, middling stats that leave it as a dead end outside of its hilariously good signature move Tail Glow, which acts as a special sword stance, raising special attack by 2 stages, made even funnier by the fact that Volbeat only learns like 4 special moves and none of them by level up. Illumis is also pure bug and is similarly unusable. Oblivious protects it from Attract and Cute Charm, but beyond that, it similarly has messy flat stats. It doesn't even get Tail Glow. Hell, it doesn't even get Signal Beam, which is a solid bug move. It just lacks a bug move altogether, and proves the stereotype about bugs true. The final member of the route is Roselia, Grass Poison. Grass Poison is a pretty common combination, and Roselia can't shine out compared to them, even when its only available competition in this game is Vileplume. To its credit, it tries to be a bit more unique. Natural Cure lets it cure off status when it switches out, which can make it a useful pivot for obvious status hits, and Poison Point can give it a decent chance of irritating with poison. It even has pretty decent special stats, so it could be a decent grass hitter, although that's not the most relevant type, although I guess this is a game that's half water. But low speed and general frailty make it difficult to keep around, and its moveset doesn't help. Grass Whistle, its signature move, is a less accurate Sleep Powder. Its moveset peaks at Petal Dance, which is too frail to see to the end of its 3-turn cycle, and just ends up being kind of awkward in a crowded niche. Verdanturf on the other end of the route is a quiet little town, comfortable and quaint. It houses the entry-level contest hall for people interested in that minigame and is at a level that's easy enough to slip through without high investment as a little testing ground. Its most notable occupants are Wally's family. They don't do much beyond commenting on his growth, but given how important that is to his plotline, it's nice that they thought to give his family a little to-do. With Rock Smash, the Rusturf tunnel can be opened, which reunites Wally's cousin with her boyfriend, and also gives the player the Strength HM in return, although that's not very relevant yet. Going north from Mauville instead leads to 111. Immediately on the route is the Wind Street House, a group of 4 battles in a row. No reorganizing the party, leaving to heal, just 4 battles. The 4 family members are relatively strong, and it actually ends up being a more taxing challenge than most gyms and even the Elite Four for it. Gabby and Ty also make their first appearance here, a news reporter and her cameraman who appear in various spots throughout the game for a double battle, with each one getting more and more difficult up to 6 times, and their continual presence makes them fairly good for grinding. While their simple team of Whismur and Magnemite aren't too difficult, even as they evolve, I love the theming with the mic and electricity theme of the TV reporter duo. A majority of 111 is off limits for now. The route is cut in half by a large desert that the player can't move into thanks to the sandstorm raging there. Instead, the player needs to take a bit of a detour. Route 112 is the smallest in the game, at least as far as playable space. One small patch of grass and a handful of trainers make up the portion that the player uses, however the cable car up to Mount Chimney and Mount Chimney itself are a bulk of the route. The red rocks of Mount Chimney give the area its own distinctive look, and despite the limitation of the game's art style and screen size, the many layers of the volcano sell its scale pretty well. 112 only has 2 Pokemon. Machop, whose evolution Machamp, is still a pretty big hitter for the fighting type, especially with its wide moveset, and newcomer Numel, Fire Ground, who becomes Camerupt at 33. Oblivious isn't much of an ability for it, although there certainly are some opponents who use Confusion quite frequently, but Camerupt ends up rather interesting regardless. Both of its types are fantastic for offensive presence, and it absolutely has both offensive stats to back up destroying things with them. But despite how it looks, Camerupt is rather frail, a sort of odd min-max where it's all-out slow offensive force. Its typing doesn't give it many relevant resists. Bug, Steel, and Poison are rare this generation, but outside of Water, a scary type in Hoenn, it doesn't fear much, which can give it a decent bit of survivability to devastate opponents with its gigantic attacks. With the cable car blocked off, the only way past the harsh desert is Firey Path. It's technically a dungeon, but it's literally a straight line with a simple optional strength puzzle that can be returned to later for a Firestone. It's not much of a location, but I do like the added detailed puffs of steam from the heats. Befitting the volcano that the cave cuts through, it's loaded with fires and poison, plus a Machop. Koffing and Grimer act as soft exclusives, but their extremely high evolution levels compared to the mid-teens they're required at makes them a bit of a pain, although both are decently good choices for the slim poison pickings of Hoenn. Slugma has the same issue, but Macargo is a really funny Pokemon to use, one of the most flawed Pokemon, 4 times weaknesses to water and ground, and slow, but a deadly glass cannon when allowed to be. Magma armor is useless as nothing will ever try to freeze Slugma, but Flame Body is alright due to how hard burn can cripple physical attackers. Torkoal ends up being very unique among fire types. Its signature ability White Smoke prevents all stat reductions. This and its Titanic 140 defense give the normally relatively vulnerable mono fire type some defensive legs, which really is good enough to make up for its other stats being kinda mediocre, letting it set up with Curse for powerful body slams or just to drop some decent flamethrowers. While it has trouble with the ubiquitous waters of Hoenn, it ends up being a really funny option to send in on Intimidators and other stuff that loves to play with stat drops. Ignoring Sand Attack is always pretty powerful. Firey Path spits the player out at North 111, and as sort of a concession for the length of the travel between Mauville and the next city, an old woman in a house will offer to heal the player, but every time she does, insists they're still tired and should rest more until the player argues out of it. Average Minnesotan grandmother. The upper half of 111 leads straight into 113. I love this route. It's easy to be blown away by an elaborate city, but the falling ash on 113 and the way the ashes settled on the grass gets disrupted and leaves a path as the player moves through it, along with the generally muted color palette, just perfection. The route also introduces my favorite trainer class, Ninja Kids. Unlike the bug catchers of the world, they don't play along type lines and instead tend to use Ninjask because duh, and Koffing, their ninja smoke ball. Found on this route, Skarmory. While it's not at its most powerful, it's still a defensive monster that can be hard to crack thanks to the crazy steel flying typing that leaves it only vulnerable to fire and electric, making it perfect for defensive situations, especially as a spike setter and whirlwinder, in lieu of even more powerful entry hazards to set, only really suffering from Keen Eye and Sturdy being extremely situational nothing abilities. Spinda, pure normal, is probably the most unique Shitmon ever made. Its most notable attribute is its roughly 4 million forms. On encounter, the 3 spots on its body are randomly placed, giving almost every Spinda a unique appearance. A fun gimmick for sure, but not one that's relevant beyond being some developer's pet project. Spinda is built entirely around Confusion. Its ability on tempo prevents it, Dizzy Punch spreads it, plus gets Stab, and its signature Teeter Dance is a Confusion spread move that confuses everything in a double battle. Good Confusion luck can snag Spinda some cheesy kills, but in fitting with the spinning thing, it only has 360 base stat total, a full circle of 60 in every stat, and combined with its pure normal typing, that's not very impressive. I don't think there's any type that would make 60 in every stat impressive, honestly. It's kind of incredible how terrible Spinda is made to be, being pathetically weak in every stat to the point of utter unusability. It's a solid contender for the worst Pokemon ever designed, besides stuff like Magikarp that has that as a step in its gimmick to becoming super overpowered. Fallarbor is one of the few times the games have ever really bothered to acknowledge food sources in Pokemon, as the little town has farms lining both sides. Nestled in the valleys near Mount Chimney, its seclusion has drawn Professor Cosmo, a scientist who studies meteorites. You can find his house pretty easily, it's the one with the giant crater next to it. The muted colors continue from the prior route and give the town its own little feel in the way that its very on-the-nose name implies. Like a few of the other small towns in this game, outside of a contest hall, there isn't much to see. Route 114 continues these earthy colors, but after progressing past the bridge, quickly becomes green again before transitioning into a yellowish mountain. This game is always packed with new stuff to see, thankfully. Introduced here is Swablu, normal flying, but when it evolves into Altaria at 35, it becomes dragon flying. Its sole ability, Natural Cure, lets it cure off status, but for a dragon, and perhaps because of its accessibility, it's really quite weak. Its defenses are nice, and it has a decent amount of resistances, even if it hates ice, but it's kind of a do-nothing Pokemon. Slow, low attacking stats, Dragon is only a valuable stab in a scenario where you're strong enough to gain value on almost entirely neutral hits, and Flying is very situational. Dragon Dance is so overpowered that eventually it makes Altaria decent, but compared to this region's 2 other Dragon Flying types, Altaria is bottom of the barrel. The rivalry exclusives also show up here. Zangoose and Ruby is pure normal and has immunity as an ability. The poison immunity can come up, but it's more flavor than function to go along with its counterparts. Zangoose is pretty thoroughly min-maxed, a moderately fast physical attacker glass cannon. Its signature move Crush Claw both has decent power and a 50-50 chance of dropping defense, which is pretty powerful, although it needs TMs to get any sort of coverage. Even so, it's a pretty great neutral hitter. Sliviper and Sapphire is the counterpoint, pure poison with shed skin to occasionally cure status in battle. It's also a glass cannon, but with solid attacking stats physically and specially, while being unfortunately slow. It doesn't even have that many uses for its special attack outside of Bite and Crunch, which, unfortunately for it, don't remain special for long. Its signature Poison Tail has a boosted crit ratio and a slight poison chance, which is rather solid when it pops off, and is one of the better poison moves in the game, although Sliviper won't come together based off of one neat move. Meteor Falls is a fun area. I mean, the name kinda gives it away, a cave checkered with craters and a giant waterfall. I do wonder how the meteorites get into this seemingly sealed cave to leave craters, but it's still a fun play on Mount Moon from Kanto and a very unique area. Professor Cosmo is here. After finding a rare meteorite, the villain team of the game has come to collect it for not entirely clear reasons and are heading off to Mount Chimney. They aren't fought, but it importantly introduces the opposite team. In Ruby, Team Aqua appears as allies who oppose Magma's plans, and the opposite in Sapphire. Don't get too excited though, they appear sparsely to give some long-winded lectures about the dangers of messing with nature and wander off. They serve as a counterpoint to the villains, but when we actually get to the villains, I mean, you'll see how little that actually means. Fitting the theme, Lunatone and Solrock are found here in Sapphire and Ruby respectively, both rock psychic with levitate to dodge ground moves. The two almost entirely only differ in their line on the splits. Give or take a few moves, Solrock's attack is Lunatone's special attack, and the same applies to the defense. Lunatone's special lean easily makes it the stronger of the two. Water, Grass, and Dark are substantially more common than Bug, Ghost, and Steel's weaknesses, which gives Lunatone survivability. But also, Solrock is way more reliant on Rock Throw and eventually Rock Slide plus Shadow Ball, even if it gets the very goofy Solar Beam as coverage, although Lunatone arguably gets it better with Psychic and Ice Beam. They're both fairly limited in scope, but can be solid additions either way, have neat designs, and are fun to use by having a unique typing and a lot of resistances. Meteor Falls is kind enough to dump the player on Route 115 just north of Rustboro, and therefore close to the Rusturf tunnel to use a shortcut back to 111 and Mount Chimney. With the cable car unblocked, the player can reach the top of Mount Chimney where the villainous team finally reveals some of their plan amidst a charming small-scale gang war with the friendly team. So finally we get some story. What are the villains up to? While Magma wants to throw a meteorite into a volcano to make it explode and make the world really hot so all the water evaporates, and Aqua wants to do the same, but somehow the meteor would turn off the volcano and make more rain to make the world wetter. If that sounds a bit stupid, it's because it is. At least if you squint really hard, Aqua's plan kinda is almost reasonable. Water is like the cornerstone of life, so more of it could be good in some contexts. When it comes to making it so hot that the world's ocean recedes, it seems like, all the fresh water would be gone too and everyone would die. The flaws in their plans are immediately apparent, especially given both leaders are supposed to be fairly smart people, especially Magma's Maxi, who the remake portrays as cold and calculating scientists. Rocket worked as a villain team for their simplicity. Under Giovanni, they're essentially the Yakuza, an organized gang of thieves and petty criminals, and after, they're the shattered remnants of that organization. Aqua and Magma, on the other hand, are a group of exceedingly stupid eco-terrorists whose plan is so obviously bad that it would end the world. It becomes hard to take them seriously for how stupid they are, and it really only gets worse from here. There's definitely some idea here about the dangers of extremism, that both teams have good intentions but take it so far that it veers into dangerous territory, but again, that sounds like an idea for a story about a controlling ruler, not so much a gang of clowns who can't comprehend the necessity of water. The volcano thing barely makes sense either. I mean, a meteorite is just a rock, and Aqua feels a little out of place here. That said, it's absolutely a cool place to have a first true confrontation with the villains. Both teams do roughly the same thing in battles, with a crucial difference in their signature Pokemon. The admins, Magma's Tabitha, that's not a man's name, and Aqua's Mad, each use two of their group's main Pokemon alongside a Poochyena. Tabitha uses two Numel and Matt uses two Carvanha. Meanwhile, each leader uses Mightyena, Golbat, and the evolved form of their team's signature Pokemon, Camerupt or Sharpedo. Mightyena's Intimidate can actually make it a bit of a wall, and Golbat, while not that powerful, is fast, and Supersonic and Bite can cause a fairly effective Confusion and Flinch Lockdown. As for their signature Pokemon, Maxie's Camerupt, as I said earlier, unless you happen to have picked up a water type early or started with Mudkip, can actually be rather hard to put a dent in, while threatening to roll good on magnitude for gigantic damage. Meanwhile, Archie's Sharpedo actually tends not to be that much of a problem. It's a really fast glass cannon, and I'll cover it more soon, but even with a really solid set of resistances from its water dark typing, the type is very vulnerable to some very powerful types like fighting and electric, and Sharpedo is so frail even neutral hits threaten it. And only having Crunch and Rage means its hits are very survivable for the most part in this fight. The fight is contextually cool for the setting, but both leaders have some pretty big flaws in this fight. Upon their defeat, for some reason, they do not destroy the volcano and just move on. They have no reason to do so, but it's that simple to deal with them, although they'll be back sooner or later. Mount Chimney offers a new path down via the Jagged Pass, a cliffy hill back to the bottom. It's one of the few places where the acrobike is useful, as at certain spots it can be used to return up levels, which lets you fight every trainer in one run. I also like that as you work your way down, the ash falling from the volcano fades away. For reasons I genuinely don't get, in Ruby, the Pokemon are slightly lower leveled here. I don't know why. Jagged Pass also has a Pokemon only found here, Spoink. Perhaps its springy little body is adapted to going up and down these ledges. Also, Spoink is adorable. At 32, Spoink becomes Grumpig, and both are pure Psychic, each with Thick Fat, whose extra resistances actually go great with Grumpig's already very good Special Bulk, and Oblivious. Dodging Confusion is always a decent effect, but situational. Unfortunately, Grumpig is kind of another do-nothing Pokemon. Its special defense is fantastic, and its special attack is serviceable, but it actually gets very little of the incredible coverage that most Psychics do, only getting the electric Swift Clone Shockwave. It seems the primary intent was to use it as a dedicated Magic Coat Pokemon, its signature move that acts as counter for status moves, returning obnoxious moves like Confuse Ray and Thunder Wave back to sender, although this is prediction reliant and largely niche, as its rare status moves will be able to eliminate threats outright on their own, leaving Grumpig as a fairly weak Pokemon, while having to compete with Alakazam and Gardevoir. And after so much time, we finally get to the 4th gym. I love when the games take twisting and turning paths. To reach this, you've seen almost all of West Hoenn, so it feels really satisfying to reach an area you've seen a bit of earlier and finally get to explore it. Lavaridge's main attraction is its hot spring, built right out of the back of the Pokemon Center. Being able to just sit in it, head poking slightly out, has a charm to it, even if it's merely just a cute little aesthetic thing, and the people of the town seem to love it. A woman near the spring also gives you an egg, tutorializing them, I suppose. On hatching, it's revealed to be a Wynot. In the same way as Azrael, Wynot is the other Gen 3 baby, and becomes Wobbuffet at 15. Wynot ends up being one of the better babies. For one, in a pinch, say, Wobbuffet getting banned, it effectively does the exact same thing that Wobbuffet does, but with less HP as a resource, although that hardly means anything when Focus Sash comes into existence next generation. For another, it has Encore, a move that Wobbuffet doesn't usually learn, but can make Wobbuffet far less prediction reliant by forcing an opponent to use a move. Wobbuffet is a ridiculous gimmick, pure Psychic, and its signature ability Shadow Tag prevents opponents from switching or running, and it only learns 4 moves, 6 with Encore and the always useless Splash from Wynot, Counter, Mirror Coat, Safeguard, and Destiny Bond, a literal living punching bag. All Wobbuffet can do is reflect the huge amounts of damage it takes back to sender, or take them with it using Destiny Bond. In-game, it's hugely impractical. Difficult to grind, prediction reliant, but in competitive, Shadow Tag turns it into a horrible set of coin flips where any single action can become a 1-for-1 trade at best, if not a 2-for-1. The lack of Focus Sash holds it back, but it's not for lack of trying. Wobbuffet is great in a lot of contexts, even if it's extremely difficult to use. Now, finally time for a gym. It's been ages. Lavaridge gym being hot spring themed is great. While towns often have a bit of flavor leak into their gyms, it's rare to see it so thoroughly incorporated, and it's especially cool given how the gym is just built around the town's natural resources. The puzzle itself is okay. The gym has 2 floors, holes on the top floor drop the player to the lower one, and geysers below blast them back up, although some of the geysers hide trainers instead. There's no way to tell which is which. You can kinda intuit where the correct path through the maze is to dodge them, but they aren't the puzzle so much as the simple maze and its few fake outs to drop you to earlier points are. Flannery has a surprising amount of personality for a leader. She's new to the job following her father stepping down, and gives hints about her insecurity and overexcitement, which isn't huge, but it's enough. Fire is surprisingly less vulnerable than you'd expect. Despite how much water the game has, without surf and the better fishing rods, the only water options are Wingull, Marrow, Magikarp, and Tentacool, plus Mudkip if you started with that. And while these are all pretty good options, there's a decent chance the player won't be using any of these. Magikarp and Tentacool require interacting with the nightmarish fishing mechanics where a player needs to repeatedly reel in a catch multiple times, up to 7 times before getting their Pokemon. Marrow's found in one tiny patch of grass the player doesn't need to go past, and a player who goes with Tailo may not also want Wingull. Granted, Swampert decimates here, but it decimates most everywhere. As for Flannery, she uses 2 Slugma, extremely slow and flawed Pokemon, although if they survive a hit, they have a decent chance to use Sunny Day to boost fire and make water less effective, and her ace is Torkoal, whose immense bulk and relatively high level can make it a headache to deal with. Ground and Rock struggle to chip its Titanic defense, so water is basically a must for dealing with it in a lot of scenarios. It also carries the incredibly powerful move Overheat, which deals massive damage but lowers Torkoal's special attack significantly, while Body Slam also spreads paralysis. Flail gets stronger as Torkoal gets chipped down, and Attract turns some matchups into huge dice rolls. All this is to say that while not the most difficult fight in the series or anything, hell, not even in this game, Flannery is a pretty significant threat in her own right that makes the battle satisfying as hell. Upon leaving the gym, the player bumps into May, who gifts them the Go Goggles. All these do is let you go into the desert on Route 111, which is an entirely optional area that has some neat stuff in it. In the desert, a sandstorm rages constantly. While this is a neat aesthetic for the area, it also gives the area its own gimmick. A few previous areas had unique puzzles in prior generations, but every battle in this area has permanent sandstorm that drains the health of most things except, Swampert. This area is well designed around this gimmick. Every trainer and wild encounter is immune to the effects of sand either through typing or ability, even if some of them make it very annoying. Sandville. But even so, it stands out as an incredibly unique area in the series for committing so thoroughly to the bits. It also means you need to consider your team some. Ground, Rock, and Steel are huge benefits here, and switching to something that isn't mid-battle can make you take a good chunk of damage from sand over time. I do find it odd. Japan isn't known for its deserts, and if I had to guess, it was meant to preserve some great deserty designs that otherwise just don't fit anywhere in the region. Entirely optional, the main reason to come here is for the variety of decent Pokemon available here. Sandshrew returns, and some trainers use its evolution Sandslash, and as you may guess, their ability Sandveil, which boosts evasion by 20% in a sandstorm, makes this area moderately frustrating. Missing is frequent, especially when using attacks that can already miss, and Sandshrew has Poison Sting just in case you weren't getting unlucky enough. Trapinch is pure ground and has 2 great abilities. Hyper Cutter, a great ability that prevents attack drops, and Arena Trap, a completely broken ability that prevents anything that isn't a flying type or without the ability Levitate from switching or fleeing, like a slightly nerfed Shadow Tag. However, at its first stage, Trapinch isn't very useful. Hell, even compared to other first stages, it just isn't very good. However, at 35 it becomes Vibrava and gains Dragon, while also switching to the singular ability Levitate, both of which carry into Flygon at 45. Despite the memes about Game Freak hating Flygon, it's insane it took so long for it to get Dragon Dance, somehow Lapras beat it to the punch. It's actually quite good. 100 attack and speed and 80 everywhere else. It's a solid all-arounder with some incredible attacks even past its 2 great stabs. Steel Wing, Flamethrower, Crunch, and outside of a severe weakness to ice, it only really fears other dragons, and even then it's decent as an anti-dragon too. It's fun, versatile, and has a great design allowing it to really just run with it, especially on dedicated sand teams which help chip down things so it can land its huge hits. Cacnea is pure grass. Normally this would leave it open to chip from sand, however Sandville adds an immunity to that and makes it a pain to fight. Upon evolving at 32 in a Cacturn, it gains Dark as well. It actually serves more as a counter sand than as sand support, although it is good for getting rid of ground and rocks trying to hijack your sand for themselves. Their signature Needle Arm isn't the strongest grass move, but has a decent chance to cause the opponent to flinch, and Giga Drain can be used to keep Cacturne relatively healthy. Unfortunately, Cacturne has some huge issues, shame as I love its design. Its huge attack and special are sadly undercut by bad stats everywhere else, making it a glass cannon when Sandveil falls through, although its hits are killer when they land, but the real issue is Grass Dark, an extremely questionable type. 6 weaknesses, including some of the strongest offensive types, fire, fighting, flying, ice. It has a fairly large suite of resistances too, but it crumbles so easily to so many common types that it's rare its full potential gets to come out. Finally, Boltoy, which becomes Claydol at 36, both ground psychic with levitate. Claydol is a hell of a wall, its defenses are great, but it's also serviceable everywhere else, and it's got 2 great stabs to boot. While it has a lot of weaknesses, especially in this generation, water, ice, and ghosts are huge issues. Scary, but even then it can tank hits well, and it has some spicy coverage of its own, like Shadow Ball, Ice Beam, Ancient Power, and despite not having the best attacking stats, it becomes an extremely fun Pokemon to use that can take a lot of punishment and bounce back with some pretty incredible moves. The desert also houses the fossils. Much like Generation 1, the player can only choose one while the other sinks into the sand. Breeding means that this isn't too big a headache given that you have a friend, thankfully. The fossils can be revived in the Devon building in Rustboro, and both of them are surprisingly interesting. The claw fossil becomes Anorith, rock bug. Anorith itself is pretty awful to use, being stuck with Water Gun, Scratch, and Metal Claw for much of its time up to its evolution. However, at 40 it becomes the extremely cool Armaldo. 125 attack is massive, and its defenses are pretty solid too. Hell, outside of its rather low speed, it's serviceable pretty much everywhere, especially with battle armor protecting it from critical hits. Bug Rock is a pretty neutral type, only weak to water, rock, and steel, but only resisting normal and poison. However, this isn't exactly a negative for this bulky guy. If a good bug move existed in this generation, as it will in the next, it'd be a massive threat, but moves like Ancient Power, Rock Slide, Earthquake, and Brick Break still make it pretty terrifying physical force that can absolutely tear down teams that don't have some way to prevent it from doing so. It's just an incredibly fun Pokemon to use. On the other hand, the root fossil evolves into Lileep, which evolves into Cradily at 40, both rock grass. Cradily is just a strange Pokemon, made to be the ultimate wall. Suction Cup prevents moves like Whirlwind or Roar from forcing it out, its defenses are both really good, and like Armaldo, it's a very neutral type that only relevantly fears ice and fighting. However, it has almost no direct offensive presence, instead it seems to be built around using Ingrain to sit on opponents, a move that makes it so the Pokemon can't switch out but it gains a little bit of health at the end of every turn to sit on opponents while whittling them down under Sandstorm, Toxic, Confuse Ray, and Boost Lick Amnesia, just sitting on them passively and whittling them down over time, and to its credit, in a lot of scenarios this can actually be pretty scary. Its primary counters, while common types, aren't always the most available moves, and its bulk is high enough that it can sometimes tank them anyway. It just also unfortunately is not a very fun playstyle for the in-game story, as it's rather slow and consists of a lot of turns of just passing while the opponent dies slowly. It's extremely unique for its role in this game, really ahead of its time for forms of stall that would develop later, just not very interesting to use for the story mode. With all that out of the way, the west portion of Hoenn only has one more major fight, dear old Dad Norman. The Petalburg Gym's gimmick is pretty unique. Upon entering, the player is offered the choice of 2 rooms, which connect to rooms with 2 more choices, then 1 room beyond that, then the leader. At least 3 of these rooms must be completed, and each room is centered on a stat boosting item. The one-hit KO room trainer uses a dire hit to boost their Pokemon's crit rate, the attack room trainer uses an X attack, and so on. However, this causes an immediate issue. These trainers all lead with their item, giving the player an immediate free turn to gain massive advantage on these trainers that all use a single Pokemon, all of which are fairly basic normal types like Linoon, Zangoose, and Delcatty. Norman himself can be a gigantic wall. He's this game's Whitney, really. Norman uses 2 Slacking and 1 Vigoroth, all pretty high level for the time, and I mean, I've talked about how killer Slacking can be. It's like facing down 2 legendaries with a handicap, and they can be both extremely hard to put down and can put you down extremely fast, even if you're pretty prepared. Even the Unshakable Swampert can get pushed around a bit. Status and Protect are very strong here. Burn especially can cripple the physical Slackings, even if it makes Facade a bit scarier, and does a lot of damage over time given the slacking off turns, and Protect in general just kind of breaks Slacking with a simple Protect attack loop. But even so, this may well be the hardest fight before the champion. It genuinely feels like a massive achievement to overcome, and it really does come down to good strategizing. Blaziken's double kick can be a huge leg up offensively, but it struggles defensively to stand up to the hits that Slacking can throw out. Nose Pass could wall it well, but it wouldn't be able to do any damage. It's a fantastic opportunity to test how balanced your team is, and a great reminder that all-out offense isn't always the best option. Seeing Norman taken aback by how powerful his child has become is also a nice simple moment. a very real reflection on how his child is growing up, even if it's not lingered on for long. Wally's dad also stops by to give you a gift for helping his son, the HM for Surf. Oh boy, we got a lot to cover. Many lakes and ponds throughout the game are opened up. Nothing new to find Pokemon-wise outside of the odd Pelipper encounter, but with a lot of items hidden behind them, rare candies, vitamins, and so on. Route 115 north of Petalburg, which was used to leave Meteor Falls, has an entire section hiding behind Surf. It's just a small section with some trainers and berry trees, but oddly enough it's the only home to Jigglypuff. Wigglytuff is still pretty jank, and Igglybuff is useless marketing fodder. It's also the only place to find a fully evolved Swellow, and I don't know why. The routes sailed through to reach Dewford and later Slateport also open up. They definitely are sea routes. 105 has water trainers and Tentacool, Wingull, and Pelipper to fight. 106 wraps around Dewford, 107 leaves it, 109 leads into Slateport. All of these routes are functionally identical, long and exhausting, and this is just the tip of the iceberg for water routes. Almost every single one after this is also the same. You can't even easily cheese them with grass, as both Wingull and Tentacool are neutral to it. It needs to specifically be electric to cut through the shits, and the slightest variance trainers have with their water Pokemon does little to alleviate the boredom. 108 is the only unique one here, not for anything it does, but for housing the abandoned ship, a tiny little dungeon that was formerly the SS Cactus. I don't know what was going on with the desert stuff in this horribly wet game, maybe it was ironic. Outside of some trainers, the first trip to this extremely unique little area only offers a chance to get a fully evolved Tentacruel. You don't really need that, but it's neat. The most interesting thing on the ship is its puzzle, although it isn't accessible until the player can dive. The later sections of the boat house something that the game's never reused, a series of rooms that have a key hiding in each that glistens when the player enters, slowly escalating it by first introducing random junk that also glistens, then ending with having to walk through a door, memorize the glistens, then enter through a different door and find the item from there. It's this short little one-off puzzle that's easy to understand, but still adds a decent bit of engagement, and it's worth doing for the Ice Beam TM, Waterstone, and the Scanner, an item that can be traded to Captain Cern for one of Clamperl's 2 evolution items, which I'll get to later. A short side quest also opens near Mauville. Watson will ask the player to go to Old Mauville, a power plant under the city, to turn off a malfunctioning generator. Similar to Kanto's power plant, the place is loaded with Voltorb, Magnemite, Electrode, and Magneton exclusively. The dungeon is fairly short, but has an okay gimmick, with green and blue doors that open or close opposite each other when certain buttons are pressed, which is fine enough as it goes for a short side dungeon. The route east of Mauville, 118, also becomes accessible and leads to the entire second half of the map. It's a new world over there. Linen and Manectric are wild Pokemon now. Kecleon is first available here, although only at a 1% rate. It can be found in several areas as fixed encounters later, acting like this game's equivalent of Snorlax and Sudowoodo, so this essentially serves as a safety net against getting locked out as it was possible to do with the prior two. Kecleon is pure normal, however it rarely stays that way for long. It's another gimmick Pokemon centered on its ability Color Change, which changes its type to whatever the last damage dealing attack that hit it is. It's not very good. It's extremely exploitable to let your opponent pick your weakness, and that's before considering that it almost certainly rips stab away from you. Granted, the AI movesets sometimes allow it to work as it was probably intended to, as they tend to only have one attacking type and tend to be slim in coverage, plus they don't tend to switch out against you, but it's generally pretty questionable. Despite the immediate issues, Kecleon at least has some pretty great special defense and decent attack, but everything else is pretty bad, and combined with the weird ability, it usually ends up failing to work out. Steven is here, he says some kind of vague fluff and leaves. Also, the Good Rod opens up a shockingly high amount of Pokemon to the player. 118 itself has Carvanha finally, which becomes Sharpedo at 30, both Water Dark, a surprisingly defensive type, although not one without weaknesses. The pair share a signature ability in Rough Skin, which deals 1/16 of the attacker's HP back to it when hit with a contact move. That sounds kinda cool, but damn, that's an awkward ability for something as absurdly frail as Sharpedo. Sharpedo is crazy min-max, next to no defenses or health, but fantastic attack, great special attack, and speed. And while that attack is mostly wasted in this generation thanks to the typing, although this fucking shark gets Earthquake, it ended up being amazing foresight that would make Sharpedo even better offensively later, despite its brutal defenses holding it back. Route 117 has Corphish, Pure Water, which evolves into Crawdaunt at 30, at which point it gains Dark. Wait, didn't we just do that? Hyper Cutter keeps its attack safe, while Shell Armor protects it from crits. Both are fine if moderately situational abilities, so it could be worse. What couldn't be worse are the Sharpedo comparisons. Crawdaunt has the same attack and special attack as Sharpedo, but drops min-maxing in favor of being slow and mediocre in everything. As funny as it is, Crabhammer doesn't save Crawdaunt from being the inferior option on basically every level. Pretty much every ocean route has Wailmer, which evolves at 40 into Wailord, both pure water. Water Veil is a typically useless ability, as attempting to burn a water type is rarely the play, and Oblivious is situational, although Attract does come up. The most notable attribute Wailord has is that it's the biggest Pokemon by a substantial amount. Its Titanic HP makes up for its bad defenses, and both attacking stats are fine. Wailord is an extremely basic water attacker, primarily using Water Spout, a move that's stronger the more HP its user has. Hydro Pump and Ice Beam, it may very well be the most boring water type to use simply for how generically it fills a role and how mediocrely it does so. On Route 111, you can fish up Walmart Swampert. Barboach is Water Ground and becomes Wishcash at 30, with their ability being Oblivious. Wishcash is basically Swampert, high HP, basically even everywhere else, but it's about 70 base stat total lower. The crazy typing still makes it pretty usable, and it works as a discount Swamper if you're not using Swampert. However, it is for all intents and purposes just a flat out worse version of, the most crazy starter in the series so far. Route 119 is jam-packed with gimmicks. It introduces Tall Grass, which is exactly what it sounds like. It doesn't have unique encounters or anything, but the player can't bike or run in it and becomes mostly obscured, as do trainers, which is put to good use with the Union Circle, a group of trainers who move when the player does, although in different directions from the player. This section of the route also tends to rain, a 3 in 4 chance, which like the desert carries into battles, but thanks to being a far less destructive weather, is more a nice boost for waters than a hindrance in navigating this route. 119 is also one of the very few places to include rails for the acrobike, with nooks and crannies to explore for trainers and items. Also not so much a feature, but there's a house on the route where a guy tells you he has the idea to gather a bunch of bird Pokemon so he can fly around on them, and upon entering the house, it's absolutely loaded with Wingull. It's a surprisingly funny little gag to just stick in the middle of a random route. Tropius appears here, sporting the rare and odd grass flying typing, as well as Chlorophyll to give it a hefty speed boost that it greatly appreciates in Sun. Tropius is rather unfortunate, being a very defensive Pokemon statistically with rather low attacking stats, but also it's weak to rock, fire, flying, and doubly ice, while only sporting 3 resistances. While Synthesis and Solar Beam give it something to do in Sun, when combined with its speed becoming decent, it's largely another do-nothing Pokemon, a great design whose banana leaf wings couldn't get it off the ground. Phoebus easily has the most unique encounter method in the series so far, for better and for worse. Every day, 4 random water tiles are chosen to house it, and it can be found 50% of the time on each of those, and nowhere else. Depending on luck, it can lead to a solid hour or 2 of fishing every spot once, twice if you're paranoid, and the Gen 3 fishing mechanics don't make that any less painful or tedious. Phoebus itself is Magikarp but ugly. Water, Swift Swim, Splash, Tackle, and Flail. It's all a play on the original useless gimmick, and similarly goes 180 when it evolves. Alongside its insane encounter method, its evolution method is wacky too. Phoebus evolves when it's leveled up with Maximum Beauty. That means there's a big grind. Not of battling, but of collecting blueberries and playing the dull berry grinding minigame over and over. It's also worth noting that nature affects taste. Certain natures like or dislike certain Pokeblocks, giving them a positive or negative 10% modifier, which can make it significantly easier or outright impossible to evolve Phoebus when considering the Sheen stat that serves as a cap on contest stats. Milotic is in a sense a counterpart to Gyarados, although Gyarados' hyper offense is traded for a more defensive and specially oriented playstyle. Its signature ability Marvel scales defensive guts, boosting defense by 50% when affected by status. Bulkier when resting to heal, paralysis and therefore electric moves become a bit risky, and later on it can hold a flame orb to get the boost for free. Its special defense is naturally great, and it has decent special attack too. It largely just uses water moves and ice beam, but can also play slow with toxic rest sets. It's pretty versatile and powerful as a pure water type goes. Towards the end of Route 119 is the Weather Institute. To some extent you could consider this a dungeon, as it's a building you go to and fight like 6 Team Aqua and Magma grunts, as they want information on Kyogre and Groudon, although it's basically just 2 rooms with nothing in them. Rescuing the scientists, they gift the player with what is quite possibly the biggest shitmon ever made. Sans stuff like Magikarp and Phoebus, who are intentionally so for their ugly duckling evolution gimmick. Castform is our first form-based Gimmickmon, besides the unknown I guess. By default, Castform is pure normal, but its ability Forecast changes its form in battle depending on the weather. In Sun it becomes Sunny form, becomes Fire type, in Rain it becomes Rainy form, becomes Water, and in Hail it becomes Snowy form, becomes Ice. For reasons that boggle the mind, it lacks a form for Sandstorm, even though it's probably the best of the weathers in this generation. It also has a signature move Weather Ball, whose type changes with the weather too. Normal and no weather, fire and sun, water and rain, ice and hail, and rock and sandstorm. Okay. Which gives it stat regardless of its form, and its base power doubles in any weather, which is actually relatively powerful. Castform's big problem is the extremely mediocre 70 base stat it has in every stat. No specialization, fairly bad in everything. There's no scenario where it's better for a weather team than something more specialized. Abilities like Swift Swim, Sand Veil, and Chlorophyll give so much value to other weather stuff, as does any amount of min-maxing. Not to mention it can't even take advantage of Sandstorm, and Halo's terrible in general because it lacks a setting ability as Sun, Rain, and Sand have. It doesn't act as a universal weather counter either, as not only does it not take advantage of weather that strongly, but becoming the primary type of that weather doesn't tend to make much for counterplay. Water resists itself, so does fire, and so does ice. It's only hypothetically used as some kind of multi-weather team where it can serve all the options, but multi-weather is bad. There's never a time where cast form is better as a normal type or a weather mon than any specialized option. Perhaps the only interesting thing about it is that until Generation 8, cast form lacked shiny colorations for its form changes. They finally got introduced as deep as possible into the series. After saving the scientist, the player also gets to fight their rival again. They use the same team as last time, but slightly higher level, but by this time, Wilmer, Numel, Shroomish, and the second stage of the starters are all a bit underwhelming, and their levels just don't keep up with where the player's probably going to be at this time. Fortree is so weird to me. Its inspiration, Hyuga, is densely forested, but it's certainly not the Ewok village. It feels about as out of place as the giant desert on 111, and stands out a bit as ridiculous. There's still a soft and comforting vibe to it, even if it's a little bit ridiculous. Being forced to walk when traveling the rope bridges that connect the silly little fort trees is relaxing in its own way. For the time being, the gym is blocked off by something invisible, and there isn't much else here. The Hidden Power TM, a trade for a skitty, it's just a small town to pass through. The long grass on Route 120 hides Absol. I don't care if it's edgy, it's a cool design. And the lore about it being shunned because people believe it causes natural disasters when it's actually trying to warn them is great stuff. Absol's pure dark and has pressure, an ability commonly seen on legendaries that causes each move the opponent uses to cost 2 PP, which can be impactful in a grind game, but doesn't play much to Absol's strengths, namely its incredible 130 attack, even if it lacks a bit elsewhere. As should be apparent, this means it's significantly better later, where dark moves can be physical. However, moves like Slash, Shadow Ball, and Aerial Ace give it a good bit of stuff to use, and it has unusually good coverage otherwise with moves like Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, and Flamethrower. It's not in its most optimal state yet, as it really loves the physical special split, but regardless of that, it's an incredibly fun and cool Pokemon to use. There's an oddity to note on 122, Scorched Slab, a small one-room cave accessed by Surf. No encounters, no puzzle, just the TM for Sunny Day. It's one of those areas that builds up an odd sense of wonder. You feel like there must be something else to it, but there simply isn't. The area is instead a cultural reference that most people won't get to the Japanese myth of Amano Iwado, the cave the sun goddess Amaterasu hid in to escape her brother Susano. To Japanese audiences, it probably served as a neat little reference, but most players just aren't going to get it. That said, I appreciate the unique weirdness of that tiny little cave. On the bridge just outside of Fortree is Steven, who gifts the player the Devon Scope, which allows them to spot invisible objects used exclusively to battle invisible Pokemon, namely a handful of Kecleon scattered about this route in 119, plus the one in front of Fortree's gym. Fortree is another gym with a great design, rotating doors with 2 or 3 sides that can be pushed 90 degrees in any direction so long as they don't hit a wall, and often require planning ahead, backtracking to set them up correctly, or coming at them from specific sides to properly line up a path through them to the end. A short and sweet little brain tease to lead up to Winona the Flying Leader. The versatility of flying gives Winona probably the strongest team of all the leaders. Swellow punishes status with Guts and Facade. Pelipper, whose water typing makes it neutral to ice, prevents an ice sweep. Skarmory, who likewise is neutral to ice as well as rock, and whose general bulk lets it set up sand attacks. And Altaria, who's neutral to electric, to prevent sweeping with that type. And despite its middling stat distribution, can get extremely dangerous with Dragon Dance. It's a solid balanced team built around flying that can't be completely bowled over with any one of flying's weaknesses, and can in turn do a decent job at turning the game around with some setup. Winona awards the ability to fly for defeating her. This comes shockingly late in the game, but it's pretty useful because of how elaborate the routes throughout the game become from here. 120 carries into 121, a small, fairly unremarkable route that serves as a bit of a junction. Sapphire sees the introduction of Shuppet here, although Ruby can find it in a nearby area, while the opposite is true for Ruby's soft exclusive. Shuppet is pure ghost, and at 37 becomes Bayonet, both having insomnia, situationally useful as sleep can be pretty crippling. Bayonet has huge attack, okay special attack, and sucks everywhere else. Its low HP makes trickier ghost stuff like Curse unviable, and its shallow move pool of Shadow Ball and the generic normal stuff everything gets like Hyper Beam leave it as a bit of a nothing Pokemon, although its speed and frailty means that even when the split happens, it ends up being extremely mediocre in general. Meanwhile, Ruby gets Duskull, also Pure Ghost, and evolving at 37, where it loses Levitate for pressure. Titanic in both defenses, Dusclops is an incredible wall that succeeds with slower strategies. Confuse Ray, Will-O-Wisp, Curse, Toxic. While not the most exciting Pokemon to use, it feels a really solid defensive position and is able to whittle down opponents by doing nothing, which is unique if nothing else, and very threatening to face in certain circumstances. North of 121 is the Hoenn Safari Zone, which mechanically is mostly the same as the prior ones, a tedious game of tossing balls and praying. It admittedly has a new system. Instead of bait, the player can feed wild Pokemon Pokeblocks, which is pretty expensive resource-wise. Like with increasing contest stats, which ones Pokemon like, and therefore which ones will reduce their fleet chance and increase their catch chance, is based on their natures, making it a bit of a blind guessing game. Not only that, but berry farming takes so long, and a mindfulness of returning to your plants that's very difficult without the newly acquired fly, that this whole system becomes rather tedious to play with, again devolving the Safari Zone into chucking and praying. Much like Generation 1 Safari Zone, the entire area is filled with Pokemon not native to Hoenn, which is a neat detail, although instead of ones that are lore-wise non-native like Tauros, it instead focuses on Pokemon from prior generations. The zone is split into 4 areas, the first 2 accessible to anyone, the third requiring the Mach Bike to reach, and the fourth requiring the Acro Bike. Zone 1 introduces Pikachu, Doduo, Natu, and Girafarig into the game. Raichu remains a solid if unimpressive electric, and Pichu remains a marketing gimmick. Dodrio is a decently powerful neutral Pokemon and a good choice for a flyer, although Swell is actually a bit stronger pick for this one. Xatu has some funny tricks, but is kinda mediocre, and Girafarig needs a little more detail as it missed Fire Red and Leaf Green unlike everything else I just listed. Normal Psychic is a weird type that gives some interesting immunities. It's fitting for the design, but I still think it looks odd on paper, but it has some neat properties like fighting neutrality and ghost immunity. Inner Focus prevents flinching, and Early Bird lets Girafarig wake up from sleep earlier, both okay if situational, although Bite is a rather common move that causes flinch, so take that for what it's worth. With a fairly even stat spread, Girafarig isn't really anything special, fairly usable for its unique typing and largely neutral stabs, but kinda just there. Area 2 has the same Pokemon in the grass, but adds Inside via Surf. Increased competition has not been kind to Golduck, but it's still fairly usable. Area 3 folds in Rhyhorn and Pinsir. Rhydon is a very solid if flawed Pokemon whose Rock Ground typing gives it some tremendous stab, but also some tremendous weaknesses, and Pinsir remains a bit of an oddity who still lacks a truly effective Bug Stab, and instead relies on odds and ends for coverage. Meanwhile, Area 4 has Phanpy and Heracross. Donphan is incredibly strong physically in offense and defense, although struggles everywhere else, which makes it a good if difficult choice, and Heracross is an absolute powerhouse with a great type and a fantastic ability to utilize its surprisingly good bug fighting typing. South of 121 is 122, a very unnotable water route that serves as the home for the much more notable Mount Pyre, Hoenn's answer to Lavender Town, a mountain that has been converted into a titanic multi-level graveyard. Despite the ghosts, Shuppet and Duskull respectively, the graveyard is a genuine place for mourning and is loaded with trainers. While the dungeon itself is limited in encounters, it has a fun brief puzzle upon reaching the top, falling through holes to reach otherwise inaccessible areas, which awards both of this game's incenses for breeding Wynot and Azurill. Pyre also has a lengthy exterior area that wraps around its outside. The main exterior is a surprisingly plain and calm cliffside that introduces some new Pokemon. Vulpix returning from before, with Ninetales being a solid if underwhelming fire type, although it does stand out for being a fair bit speedier than the likes of Torkoal, Camerupt, and Magcargo, as well as Metatite. Metatite is fighting Psychic, a very unique, largely neutral typing, and evolves at 37 into Metacham, both having the signature ability Pure Power, which has the same effect as Azumarill's Huge Power, just a raw attack doubling. This is incredibly welcome, as Metacham's stats are shockingly mediocre, just all around incredibly even and flat, plus on the low side, although this ability gives it some decent hits with its fighting moves. Had its stat distribution been better, it probably could have been really good because of its typing, but as it stands, it's not a little fighting type, with some of the defensive benefits of Psychic stuck on top. Even higher up is the summit, seemingly a more sacred part of the graveyard, shrouded in a slight fog with some open-air grave sites, which has its own comforting but eerie atmosphere. The summit has the most fucked encounter in the game. Pokemon owned by trainers and fought in battle can be viewed in the Pokedex to find their habitats, useful for finding Pokemon like Surskit, which are extremely low encounter rates. However, no trainer in the game uses the summit's 2% encounter. And there isn't that much grass, so it's not like you're going to be wandering around in there for too long to stumble into it. You just kinda got to know that it's there or get very lucky. And given how off the beaten path the tiny grass patches are here, sans foreknowledge, Chimecho is nearly impossible to stumble into. Is this incredibly hidden Pokemon good? No. Chimecho is pure Psychic with Levitate, cute as hell and genuinely bad, with passable special attack and nothing else. It can't use the variety of sound-based moves it was given, like Uproar, because all normal moves are physical, and compared to other pure Psychics, Alakazam, Gardevoir, it's handily the worst. For as cute as it is, extremely, Chimey is very nearly cast form tier in usability. At the summit's peak, Team Aqua and Magma are harassing an old couple who are guarding 2 orbs. Team Aqua steals the red orb, Team Magma steals the blue orb. After the criminals leave, the old couple offers some exposition, telling a tale about Kyogre and Groudon's legendary battle in the past, and how their powerful effects on the land and sea shaped Hoenn, as well as asking the player to retrieve the stolen orb. And this all comes up a little bit later. Even further south is 123. Its encounters are the same as 121, however it has a unique layout with 2 paths. An upper path cut off from the lower by ledges, which leads to a few items, although the 2 are largely identical. At the end of the path, before it reconnects to 118, is the Berry Master's house. To the people who actually want to run the contest circuit, his farm has 18 plots for berries, he gives out free berries daily, and secret passwords can be told to his wife to get rare and powerful berries. The beauty one more or less even makes negative nature Phoebus free. Jumping back to 121, it also connects to Lily Cove, the final city on Hoenn's mainland. Lily Cove lacks a gym, as a good handful of Hoenn cities do, but has the Master Rank Contest Hall serving as the finale for that storyline, and the nearby museum acts as a hall of fame for contests. The department store acts as it had in Kanto, offering up vitamins, TMs, and other odds and ends for sale. The city also just has a nice atmosphere. It definitely captures the feeling of a city by the sea more than the others. A huge beach, an old couple by the lighthouse reminiscing about their love, a cozy motel that houses Game Freak's staff as they don't have an office in Kyushu. It captures that vacation-y vibe that Hoenn sometimes gives off. The rival also hangs out near the department store and can be optionally battled. It's a kind of baffling fight. It hasn't been that long since the last, their levels are only 2 or 3 above what they were previously, and nothing has evolved. Even in the previous fight, you were basically guaranteed to be fully evolved across the party, sans some of the really high level evolutions like Aggron and Exploud potentially. Hell, their levels are about on par with Norman's, but Norman was using a Pokemon with legendary stats and was fought 2 or 3 hours ago. Marshtomp just can't keep up against a Blaziken that's nearly 10 levels ahead. The only addition to her team is Swellow, and yeah, that's a good bird even if we just saw Winona use it, but it doesn't patch up the massively underpowered unevolved team. I'm unsure if this is supposed to be a narrative here. With Silver, his team tells a bit about his story as it goes. The rivals here speak a bit about their mindset, showing a bit of doubt in their capacity to keep up and cheering on your journey throughout the game, but also sort of affirming that they've found their place by remaining as the research assistant to their father. That said, it's not as strong as a characterization or exciting as prior rivals. Having a rival who's mostly uninvested in being a rival, it just feels like they weren't really sure how to follow up Blue or Silver, honestly. The sea routes outside of Lily Cove are blocked off by Team Aqua or Magma members training Wilmer. Ruby is a Sapphire ROM hack, but their base in the bay is accessible, the first 10 steps before they tell you to piss off. The boss is gone and you need to return to Lily Cove for a cutscene. The game tells you to go there rather directly, but without a proper flyer, that's a hell of a hike there and immediately back just so you can watch the villains steal a submarine. It's not even a very cool cutscene. They hop in it and sail off at a press conference that hints at where the big finale of the story takes place. The Team Aqua Magma dungeon is alright. It's a teleporter maze, a little far less complex than Sylph, mostly just having optional side rooms for battles and items, including weirdly enough the Master Ball. Not gifted, just sitting in a room behind a moderately complex teleporter maze. In Sapphire, this space does kind of spell some doom for the gameplay. There's a lot of water from here on, so getting a jump on that even earlier doesn't make that any less tedious. The boss of the dungeon is Tabitha and Ruby and Matt and Sapphire. The two now use the first and second stage of their group signature Pokemon, Numor and Carvana. It doesn't matter that much. This dungeon is a fairly easy distraction, and the submarine gets away right after your admin battle with a hint that they're going under the sea somewhere. This is where the game takes a hard turn, not for the better. It gets wetter. Route 124, Sea Route. A very wide and cluttered one that makes finding the trainers on it a chore. At least the treasure hunter, living on his own private island. What are these shards worth? We'll trade shards that can be found, mostly by diving, for evolution stones. Green gives you leaf, red fire, and blue water, which is helpful, I guess. There aren't that many things that actually evolve by these stones in this game. The route directly connects to Moss Deep City, a rather large island, but may as well touch on Route 125 first. It's another fucking sea route, but it's a sea route with a side dungeon on it, Shoal Cave. Shoal has an incredible gimmick that's a bit wasted. Every 6 hours of real time, its tides rise and lower. It just kinda sucks that High Tide is extremely lame. You surf, as if there won't be enough of that soon, around a pretty empty cave while fighting off mostly Tentacle, Zubat, and Golbat. Meanwhile, Low Tide is actually a pretty fine side dungeon. A small strength puzzle, a complex layout to explore, a small room at the bottom with a short ice sliding puzzle. If the flooded version didn't exist, it'd be a really neat area with some unique Pokemon to find. As it is, it's a neat area with some unique Pokemon to find and a bad gimmick on top of it. Speaking of new Pokemon, Spheal. Ice Water is a good type. It largely covers a lot of Ice's glaring weaknesses, and hell, Thick Fat is a bit superfluous, but it never hurts, so it's a great start. Although needing a water type to surf out here kinda makes it hard to justify using, and this is definitely about the point where it's getting too late to be taking on and training up new party members. At 32, Spheal becomes Celio, then at 44 that becomes Walrein. Decent even stats, a nice health bar, and 2 great stabs make Walrein perfectly usable. Solidly bulky, guaranteed to have at least Surf, but also Blizzard or Ice Beam. Bulky enough to take advantage of rest, hell, it's even capable of being one of the only good Hail Pokemon for its bulk. If you didn't need to have a water type you've probably already trained to get it, it'd be a really solid choice. Also, their signature move Ice Ball is a clone of Rollout. It's usually not very good. In the ice room specifically is Snow Runs, the first pure ice in the series, ignoring a snowy cast form I guess, although being pure ice isn't the best selling point. At 42 it becomes Glalie, both have inner focus to prevent flinching. That's nice, dear. Glalie is confusing. Having 80 in every stat might be serviceable for something that wasn't pure ice, but lacking any specialization just immediately shoots it in the foot. I don't know, it's a flying hailstone. Why'd it go from so cute to so ugly? I'm really not even sure what to say about Glalie. It's kind of just a confusing design statistically. Just use Walrein? Moss Deep is a beautiful little city, a very different island vibe than Dewford. More developed, but still covered in nature. Dirt roads on grassy patches, those funky water trees, some pretty simple houses, including Steven's, which showcases his rare stones and cases, which is a nice little unique asset just for him. The east side of Moss Deep is dominated by a space center much like Kyushu's own. The Space Center always served as a well of myths and rumors, as the existence of 2 space-themed mysticals was revealed by hacking, especially because there isn't much going on at the Space Center, even if I appreciate it being this giant oddity at the side of the island. The Super Rod is found here, and honestly, it boosts the chance you find evolved forms like Sharpedo and helps dodge Tentacool and Wailmer, but there are only a small handful of exclusive Pokemon to it. Staryu can be found off of Lily Cove's shore, Starmie is still incredibly solid, and Horsea can be found on Route 134, which I haven't touched on, but the edge of which can be fished into from Slateport. Kingdra's typing remains incredible, and the wider move pool it can access is a huge benefit to it, with the only real downside being its trait evolution requirement. Moss Deep's gym uses spinner tiles. I usually like these as a puzzle element, and I think switching their directions could be a neat twist on them, but it's honestly a pretty linear affair of flipping every switch in the gym once and going wee to the end that doesn't make it very satisfying. Tate and Liza are fantastic leaders, if only because they actually use the double mechanic. Their team isn't very inspired though. As much as I like Solrock and Lunatone, they're both weak to water. On an island you need Surf to reach, and Solrock only has special moves, like Solar Beam is funny tech, but just because they're psychic leaders doesn't mean they need to use special Solrock. Defeating the 2 also opens up Dive, which allows access to a good chunk of small areas. Dive isn't very exciting. Underwater you move slow as hell, most of the underwater sections are pretty barren with an occasional shard, and usually let you surface to extremely small islands behind rocks that have an item or 2. Every underwater route, much like the above water routes, features the same 3 Pokemon, although I love the lineup. Chinchou has always been fun, at 27 becoming Lantern with the very unique water-electric typing and a fantastic design for both. Only weak to grass and ground, and with a significant set of resistances, plus 2 great stabs. It's a shame Lantern's stats leave a lot to be desired. Its huge HP gives it a little bit of survivability, but everything else is so low it struggles to do anything notable back. Volt Absorb gives it not only an electric immunity, but heals it when it's hit by one, which is funny, if very situational, and Illuminate doubles the encounter rate, which is maybe good for grinding, I guess. But also basically a nothing ability and probably more often annoying than anything. Clamperl's a unique little thing. It and its whole line are pure water, and it has a split trait evolution, losing shell armor, which is a nice ability even if Clamperl's a pretty pathetic first stage. Both of the evolution items it needs to evolve are mutually exclusive. Perhaps the most annoying lockout in the game, especially as it's a blind choice. Give Stern the scanner from the abandoned ship and get a nondescript item without knowing what it'll get you later, and no way to get the other beyond having a second game to take it from. When traded with the Deep Sea Tooth, it becomes Huntail and gains Swift Swim, making it a pretty decent Rainmon. Huntail is all all in on its physical stats, although rain gives it a respectable speed. However, physical and water is a pretty questionable affair in this generation. It learns no physical moves by level up and only Rock Tomb and the generic normal stuff by TM. Once physical water moves exist, it actually becomes a pretty cool, bulky Gyarados in Rain, but this generation it's questionable even before considering you need 2 water HMs to reach it. The Deep Sea Scale turns Clamperl into Gorbis. It's more or less the same Pokemon, Swift Swim, most of its stats being the same, but instead it has gigantic special attack. While it is slow without Rain, in Rain it becomes a fierce water attacker with a bit of psychic coverage and the generic ice stuff. It does require that Rain to get running, but when it does, it's actually pretty crazy. Finally, Relicanth, Water Rock, and the pattern on whose body is a map. This is relevant to something later. Let him cook. Swift Swim is a godsend for Relicanth, as it is for most everything. And Rocket is situational, but Double Edge is a strong move, and ignoring recoil on it feels good. The typing is a bit shit honestly. Fighting, electric, and ground are all very relevant offensively, and 4 times grass is painful, and its resistances, while decent, don't fully make up for it nor do its stats. Coming from the Nosepath school of stat distribution, it has god tier physical defense and decent physical attack, but is slow and dies instantly to Thunderbolt. Being able to toss out powerful ancient powers for boosting gimmicks is satisfying, but it's horrible at using its water stab and just is unfortunately a good design with a bad hand. Water time. 127 is Water Route. The small sand islands and the odd water trees break it up a bit, sure, but also enjoy those Wingles and Tentacles because they aren't adding new shit to the surf lineup for any of these routes. I'll ignore 126 for the moment simply because it comes up shortly, but it do be more ocean. 128 is also even more ocean with even more Wingle, even more Tentacool. If you've ever wondered why water is a meme, it's this last stretch of the game. Surprisingly, 128 has 2 new Pokemon via fishing. Corsola shares Relicanth's odd typing, but did it first. Hustle is such an odd ability, boosting the Pokemon's attack by 50% but lowering their accuracy with physical moves by 20%. It gives Corsola the ability to use its Rock Stab by boosting its attack to a more serviceable level, but it never really feels good to do so because the accuracy hit is so huge that it absolutely will backfire. Meanwhile, Natural Cure is just simply good. Being able to wick off any status condition with a simple switch out gives Corsola a lot of extra survivability. Corsola is unfortunately though pretty terrible, another great design held back by having a pretty miserable 380 base stat total. Okay defenses and bad everywhere else. It makes Relicanth look outright usable. Speaking of miserable, Love Disc. Pure water with Swift Swim. Not that it really needs it because its only functional stat is its respectable speed. Nothing else even reaches 70, and it only has 330 base stat total, barely above Mudkip and distributed worse. Its only real play is to spam Sweet Kiss and Attract to try to lock down an opponent with confusion, but even then it makes Castform and Spin to look outright powerful. Love Disc exists for one simple reason. It has a 50% chance to have a heart scale when fished up, an item that can be traded to the move relearner to get old moves back. It's a shitmon nearly beyond compare that's useful for farming one alternate currency. Underwater 128 is Seafloor Cavern. Given it's a whole dungeon, the location is a bit irritating. The choice to shit up your water with Surf and Dive, or to leave a party member behind for a dedicated diver. Especially in this generation, having both isn't useful. At least you can kinda justify it in the remake where Dive is physical. The game is also fairly vague about how this area is found. You know it's somewhere in the Eastern Ocean, underwater, but that's still a lot of ground to cover. It wouldn't be so bad, but diving is so boring. 3 admittedly cool Pokemon throughout the underwater grass, slow movement, long linear hallways, and no puzzle elements. I knew where it was from playing the game before, and guides exist, but it certainly isn't fun to poke around for because of the inherent issues Dive has. That said, the dungeon is pretty cool. It's a bit lame that the only wild Pokemon in it are Zubat and Golbat, but the caves throughout this game have had enough variety that one Zubat dungeon isn't that bad, and a good chunk of the grunts offer some other variety. The dungeon has a lot going on besides that. It's fairly long, features several decently complex strength puzzles, a fish discovered that the final one can softlock you if you fuck it up hard enough, so I do paranoia save there. But truthfully, they're not that difficult, and it features a unique little puzzle with water currents where the player needs to follow and predict the path to get through a few areas. It's not the game's strongest dungeon, but as a big closer for the Aqua and Magma storyline, it definitely hits all the right notes. At the end of the cave is the resting place for the cover legendary, Groudon and Ruby, Kyogre and Sapphire. Again, it's fairly apparent Sapphire was written first because Groudon being in an undersea cave is a bit thematically odd, especially because this game has a large volcano area that's more or less unused. Upon reaching the sleeping giant, Maxie or Archie show up. They're a bit underwhelming, a running theme lately. although that will very quickly flip. They use Mighty Ina, Crobat, and their signature, Camerupt and Sharpedo respectively. Mighty Ina's stats have caught up with it by now, you can't even enter this dungeon without Surf, so Camerupt is a non-issue, and Sharpedo is extremely frail, but can land some nasty hits. However, Crobat can actually be pretty nasty thanks to its ridiculous speed, although it's pretty reliant on good Confuse Ray luck. Despite losing, the leader will use the Stolen Orb to awaken the giant Pokemon. Shame they're stupid. While given the choice to steal the orb, instead of taking both, or taking the red orb to control the giant red monster and the blue orb to control the giant blue monster, they instead take the opposite, causing Groudon or Kyogre to rampage. This actually has a cool effect on Eastern Hoenn, stretching 2 or 3 adjacent routes, where Groudon waking up causes the immediate area to have Sun in battles, while Kyogre does the same for Rain. And at this point the story completely derails and it can't even pretend to recover. Upon awakening their respective legendaries, the two get a call from their admins. The effect on the weather is too harsh and things are getting dangerous. The leaders in seconds realize they are of their ways and begin crying to the player to fix their mistakes. First off, everyone told you this would happen. The Weather Institute dweebs, the good team. This is obviously a stupid plan, especially for Magma. Second, all the legends talk about these things nearly destroying the worlds, presumably the legends that inspired this plan. And third, it's just structurally frustrating. The first 2 generations made legendaries an interesting reward locked behind unique little dungeons found through exploration and a few little hints, and generally irrelevant to the plot. Here the plot just comes to center on the main one, and while it does give the game a bit of an exciting narrative finale, it also just kind of directly slams you into what could have been a really fun extra thing to find in the post-game. The whole thing feels a little worse in hindsight. At the time it was an exciting escalation, even if world-ending stakes kinda clashed with the slice-of-life adventures that the game mostly was prior, but pretty much every mainline game after this in some way reuses this structure. Around the 7th or 8th gym, the story suddenly goes from a few brief encounters with the villains to a giant mess with a legendary threatening to ruin the world, with only slight twists here and there. The primary point is, in this game and others, that the last generation, the old people, fuck things up and the future needs to work together to fix it, but it feels so contrived that it always comes to, how was I supposed to know the giant death god would destroy the world? Ah, save me 10-year-old. Also, the urgency situation is a little fucked. Despite the legendary rampaging causing some bad weather, it only affects a few sea routes and cities. You can kinda just ignore it until you get around to it after it starts, even though the stakes are world-ending. In fact, let's do just that and finish the ocean. Route 29. It may be just more ocean, but Wailord is a 1% encounter here, which is very funny. Wilmer itself is only found via fishing, so it seems that the Wailord being available exclusively by surf is a subtle bit of world building. Wailord is too large and swims too deep to be fished up, but breaches the surface rarely to breathe. I've always liked seeing encounters used for a bit of storytelling like that. Route 130 has Ruby and Sapphire's most insane secret, Mirage Island. Each day a random number between 1 and 65,535 is generated, and if it matches a portion of a Pokemon in the player's party's personality value, the island appears. With a full team, the player has a roughly 1 in 11,000-ish chance to see Mirage Island. A good bit rarer than a shiny, although they can cycle their party for more chances. The island itself isn't particularly special. It's a fairly small bit of land with grass that only features wild Wynot and 1 lychee berry tree, a decently powerful berry only found here. More than anything the island is though, it's crazy that it's basically a real urban legend. Some kid stumbled across this and nobody at his playground believed him, thinking he was the "my uncle works at Nintendo" kid. 131 has nothing on it for now, but it will later. We then arrive at Pacific-Log, an interesting city if nothing else. A city floating on the water, a resident notes that it's anchored in place by being built on a reef of Corsola, a reference to Corsola's Dex entry in Silver. While this is cute, it's also in the same way as Fortree, patently ridiculous. You can't just have an NPC say that their ancestors lived and died on boats without me being like, that's not how people work. Unless they're purifying piss like in a Virtual Boy game. It's even more odd that it really just exists to be a checkpoint. It's a convenient reset point for the next route over, and therefore only really houses a Pokemon Center, a questionable trade, a Blossom to receive a Corsola, and a guy who can check for Mirage Island, so if you're juggling your PC to make it show up, you don't need to surf all the way out there to see it, just tediously walk to him a few dozen times. I feel like the city just stands out in kind of a bad way. Much like Fortree, it sticks out as silly and lacks a real payoff, drifting from magical realism into more direct fantasy. 132 is the final sea route, and the only good one. Well, that and 133, which it directly transfers into. Both routes are covered in currents that primarily move westward, with occasional vertical patches. The player needs to plan ahead their movements, to coast between islands that litter the currents with items and trainers, and while the size of the screen leads to some guess and checking, it's a good example of one thing. Water routes can be interesting despite their limited mechanics by adding something that simply mixes it up a little. It's rare that you even bump into wild encounters due to all the currents, and planning out a route to reach specific spots is extremely satisfying. The main reason to hit this route is the sealed chamber, a cave hidden in a small dive spot buried between the currents. Inside are walls and walls of text written in Braille. Don't worry, the manual for the game has a Braille alphabet inside, and I mean, Google is freely accessible in 2023. The bulk of the text simply refers to man-made Pokémon, created but feared for their power and sealed away, while smaller portions are puzzles. The Braille is the real barrier for this room, as the puzzles here just straightforwardly ask for a specific move and 2 specific Pokemon, and on solving it a rumble is heard. The game doesn't actually tell the player what it means, however observant players may remember 3 odd rock structures spread among the world that look very similar. One on Route 111, the Desert Runes, one on Route 105, Island Cave, and one on 120, Ancient Tomb. Each of these also have their own Braille puzzle within, these a little more complex than sealed chambers, but each also completely standalone where the sealed chamber has a multi-step puzzle. The legendary golems each reside in one of these locations, serving as the game's legendary trio. The group shares many similarities, although the legendary beasts these are not. The group is heavily rooted in the Hebrew golem story, a creature made of clay and given life by strange markings. I mostly bring this up because Hebrew mythology is an oddly recurrent theme in this game. Each of the 3 is monotype and has the ability Clear Body, a generally fantastic ability that blocks all stat drops, and thereby allows the golems easy access to boosting via their shared move Curse. Regirock is pure rock, Regice is pure ice, and Registeel is steel. Incredibly creative naming convention. The Regis all follow a bit of a pattern with the stats. Each has 80 HP and 50 speed, but they mess around with the attacking and defending stats. Regirock has an incredible 200 defense and solid hundreds in attack and special defense with a pitiful 50 in special attack. Regice directly flips this. Crazy special defense, good defense and special attack, horrible physical attack. Registeel flips the script a bit by landing between on all fronts, only 150 in both defenses, but 150 in both, and only 75 in the attacking stats, but also 75 in both. Despite the big numbers and good ability, the Regis have always stood out as kinda do-nothing Pokemon. Regirock's typing leaves it in a bad position. Rock can have some great defensive properties in conjunction with other types, but like Grass, it struggles as a pure typing. Grass and Water crumble it, and in the future, Special Ground, Steel, and especially Fighting are concerns too. Curse is massive for Regirock, especially because its stats are protected from drops, and in-game the AI will allow it to set up, but realistically against any competent player or AI, it'll be forced to switch out extremely quickly due to pressure from any water type. Regice is a slow, specially defensive ice type, the worst defensive type in the game, and one especially vulnerable to physical stuff, fighting, rock, and steel, plus no resistances except ice. To its credit, its Ice Beam hits like crazy, Curse can bolster its weakness as well, and it gets Electric as coverage in Thunderbolt, as all the Regis do, but it's easily the one with the largest uphill battle. Registeel ends up being the most usable of the trio. Its defenses are still crazy even if not min-max as hard, and Steel, it's Steel, 12 resist and immunity by itself. Its mixed attacking stats harm it to an extent, but it can sit on Toxic, Curse, and Rest pretty well and slowly deal with most stuff. It's not very exciting, but it's very functional. Well, in our time getting the golems, Hoenn has been completely swallowed in a great flood and only Pacific Log remains. Guess I shouldn't have laughed, they were clearly thinking ahead. Let's finally get to Sootopolis, accessible by diving into the Great Caldera. Accessible by diving into the giant caldera on Route 126 it resides in, where the big finale is going down. Steven, Maxie, and Archie are all there too, but for a second let's pretend the world isn't ending. Sootopolis is another one of those weirdly incongruent areas. The whole being based on a Greek island thing just doesn't make much sense. Don't get me wrong, Santorini is a gorgeous place to base an area on, and it's on the other side of the globe. It's perhaps worth noting that this is the first game directed by Junichi Masuda following creator Satoshi Tajiri's departure. Masuda is a rather infamous figure in Pokemon to say the least, and it's rather clear even in this first game that he didn't have much interest in sticking to the more grounded world of the prior 2 games, both by going more ridiculous in world design and the escalation to world-ending stakes. You can't put that cat back in the bag, and every game after needs to have similarly crazy stakes. That all said, Sootopolis is damn pretty. The white Greek-styled houses built around a lake stationed on the stark white cliffs of the caldera's edge, it's undeniably gorgeous. The city is rather populated too, most people just going along with their days, a few that give out TMs, also Masuda's daughter Kiri giving out berries in the corner. It's a cute Easter egg. But in the present, things are wet. Or dry. Steven leads the player to the top of the cliffs. In the back is the Cave of Origin, a very brief dungeon that spirals down to the Raging Legendary, whom the player must calm alone. The cover legendaries in this game are version exclusive, unfortunately, which is a big regression from Gold and Silver, making both available, but making the cover one accessible earlier. It makes dex completion a giant pain generally, because getting someone to give one of these up is going to be a hard sell, and legendaries can't breed. It's a genuine headache of a decision that puts a hard paywall on 100%ing the Pokedex. The legendaries also have an odd origin, I suppose. Kyogre is Leviathan, Groudon is Behemoth, monsters from Hebrew mythology who fought an endless battle of sea and land so intense only God could stop them. While it is undeniably a cool place to draw inspiration from, it does pose the question. Between this and the golems, what is with this Japanese region and biblical monsters? It feels fairly incongruous, and while I think it's not a deal breaker, it just says some odd things about religious mythology that in the Pokemon world, the Bible's greatest hits center on southern Japan. So anyway, the legendaries are, pretty good to say the least. Kyogre was, for quite a while, the best Pokemon in the series, and the remakes took that even further. Pure Water, its ability Drizzle summons rain when it's sent in. Weather summoned by abilities does not fade in generations 3 to 5. The only way to clear weather summoned by an ability is by having a different weather ability come into play. Kyogre can come out once and facilitate a rain team for the rest of the battle, which itself is so absurdly powerful, Kyogre can be terrible and still get played. However, Kyogre is also just absurdly good in its own right. 670 base stat total because it's on the box art of Sapphire, 150 special attack, 140 special defense, and at least 90 in everything else. Pure Water is a great type, Rest makes it nigh unkillable, it gets all the good water stuff, it's nearly guaranteed to be boosted by its endless rain, all the ice stuff, Thunder, which is 100% accurate in rain, it's even caught with Calm Mind, perhaps the best boosting move in the game as it raises both special stats, as if it needed even more for those. There's nothing this fucking whale can't do. It's a really exciting final fight too. Rest and Calm Mind make it a menace, plus rain boosted Hydro Pumps and Ice Beam. And given this game has a roamer, it's a hard sell to just Master Ball this monster. Keeping its health low is near impossible, it rests off status, but most importantly, it kills everything extremely fast, even resists, especially as it builds up Calm Minds. It's also ridiculously strong and kinda just solo the rest of the game by itself once you get it. While Groudon is the weaker of the pair, it's still an incredibly strong Pokemon. Pure Ground, its Drought ability summons Permanent Sun, which while strong is notably a bit less crazy. Groudon lacks the fire type, so it isn't getting boosted stab even if it does have fire moves and solar beam. Plus at this time, Sun is generally just a bit weaker than Rain as far as full teams go. Groudon has the same stats as Kyogre, but swaps its focus to physical, Earthquake, Ancient Power, Slash, Brick Break. It's got plenty to use, plus a ton of fire coverage like Fire Blast and Solar Beam to deal with Kyogre if Sun is in play. It notably struggles against its counterparts. Even in Sun, its relatively lower special attack means Solar Beam will have a hard time denting Kyogre's massive special defense, while in Rain, the stack boosts from Stab and Rain mean that most water moves will bowl Groudon over, and Kyogre has Ice Beam too, just in case, if the fight is in Sun. That said, Groudon is still a top 5 Pokemon capable of facilitating any amount of Sun strategies and absolutely decimating physically, while serving as an equally intimidating final boss using the same general game plan. Rest, Bulk Up, Calm Mind's physical counterparts, Earthquake, and Fire Blast. Maybe a bit easier as outlined above, but still crazy, and equally capable of carrying any team through the rest of the game with almost no training. Upon catching and defeating Kyogre or Groudon, peace is restored. The team leader, realizing they fucked up and deeply apologetic for the issues they caused, it's a big heel turn for 2 scenes. Although I do love that if you return to Mount Pyre, you can catch them returning their orb and apologizing profusely for the trouble. I personally would have preferred a little bit more subtlety. Perhaps the orb is just back if you return and the old lady mentions the leader coming back, although it's a cute scene as it is. With Kyogre or Groudon under control, things return to normalcy pretty quickly. Steven sees himself off and the Sootopolis gym reopens. Sootopolis' gym has a fantastic puzzle, one so good it's not only one of my favorite ever, but notably unique, pretty much exclusive to it, featuring ice tiles that crack when stepped on and break and drop the player to the lower floor if stepped on again, with the staircase to the next floor only opening if every tile is cracked. It's one of my favorite brain teasers in the series, simple to understand and giving you a full look at the puzzle ahead of you, but still giving pause because of its relatively open-ended design. Despite the ice-themed puzzle, the final gym is water-themed. Even in Ruby it's exhausting, but in Sapphire you fight through the water villain dungeon, surf around for ages, go to a second water villain dungeon, surf around more, fight a water legendary, then immediately go and fight a water themed gym. Wet, wet, wet. This is why these games get dunked on for the water. Wallace does a good job of spicing up what could have been a very tedious gym battle though, with a handful of secondary types and unique strategies. A tricky love disc that uses confusion and attack to compensate for being a love disc, a rain dance Whiskash that leverages its typing to set up for the others, Celio and Sea King, and his ace Milotic, ferociously defensive, worse when status, packing recover to stay healthy, and with Water Pulse, Ice Beam, and Twister, it can pretty cleanly hit at least most things that the player can throw at it. The Milotic especially is one of the more formidable opponents in the game, even most Graphs and Electrics have some trouble taking it down quickly, and it alone really serves to make Wallace a great conclusion to the gyms. Receiving Waterfall opens up one side area before the big finale. The upper floor is a Meteor Falls. Despite coming so late in the game, the upper area is just a medium-length cave with a sort of awkward path through it, featuring the same stuff that the cave had before, but at significantly higher levels, as well as one great gem buried within, Bagon, Pure Dragon. Bagon is the first stage of one of Hoenn's pseudo-legendaries and can be thankfully found as high as level 35, which makes the evolution process much less painful. First becoming Shelgon at 30, both of these have Rockhead, which doesn't do much for them, and Salamence at 50, where it gains flying and the incredible ability Intimidate, one of many things that makes Salamence fantastic. The Pokédex describes this journey. Bagon desperately dream of flying and take so many falls leaping off cliffs that they gain thick heads before finally achieving it. A beautiful bit that ties into how fantastic Salamence is. Like all pseudos, it has 600 base stat total, but unlike its same type pseudo counterpart Dragonite, it puts these to perfect use. Massive special attack and solid attack and speed, while still boasting passable defensive stats bolstered by Intimidate, combined with Dragon Dance, which is a +1 to speed and attack, and crazy coverage all over. Salamence is far and away one of the most powerful Pokemon in this generation, short of box legendaries. It's unfortunate it comes so late, because it would be incredible to use, but the clock is pretty well ticking at this point. That's our last new Pokemon until the post-game. From Route 128, the player can climb the waterfall to Evergrande City, and with a name like that, you know, it's, where is it? Despite the name, Evergrande is a single Pokemon Center, seemingly only existing to be a checkpoint for Victory Road, although with a rather pretty flower path leading up to it. More likely than not, this city is just a victim of extremely bad time crunch and space limitations, but as it's presented in the game, well, there's not much to say. Victory Road is a startlingly large improvement over Kantos, both of Kantos. The Pokemon selection is crazy, from Loudred to Hariyama to Mauville or Sableye, Lairon, Medicham. The variety on display means that it's not as easy as running a solid water lead. The game will absolutely force some thought out of you, and the dungeon's design is no less great, although the need for flash is a little bit irritating. The top floors consist of mishmashes of bridges to explore, the lower has a few simple strength puzzles, made a little more complex by the dark, and incorporating Rock Smash a few times, and the lowest floor features waterfalls. If the player actually took their waterfaller with them, they can actually skip a good chunk of the intended path through this. Also at the top of the waterfall is Vito, presumably the final member of the Windstreet family from back on 111. All their names begin with the letter V, and they mention their greatest family member was working towards the Pokemon League, which is some fantastic attention to detail. Of course, as we near the end, it's time for one last rival battle. It's been a while since the last, and seeing the final team is a must, knowing that Steven is the champion, and then Wally walks out. I'm split. I love the payoff for Wally, that he was so inspired by you he became a proper rival, one who's driven to compete with you, unlike Brendan or May. But on the other hand, what the fuck? Last time we fight the rival, optionally, they're still using the middle stage of their starter. It's so disappointing to never get to see their team in its final form, although Wally's is admittedly great. His Ralts is now a wicked Calm Mind Gardevoir. Double Team is kinda cruel though, but it's still quite a hard hitter and synchronized to Suede status. Dragon Dance makes his Altaria a threat in its own right, Sing and Assist Delicatty can be a wild card that throws a wrench in any team, Roselia spreads Toxic and Leech Seed, and Magneton remains a solid Pokemon in its own right. It's both powerful and a bit unusual, not built around a typical fire, water, grass core, but instead feeling more like a team I would make, a bit disjointed, but with strong and interesting tactics spread across a variety of types and Pokemon that cover many possible Pokemon the player could use. Cruel as it is to Brennan and May, Wally proves himself as a good rival to the player. It's a good ending for him, even if it comes at the cost of the rival themselves, and it's a good twist on the expected formula to keep things at least a little bit fresh. With Victory Road cleared, there's only the final regal approach to the Pokemon League, with the Elite Four as the final challenge. Sydney's Dark team walks the line of offensive and defensive, as Dark tends to do. The immediate Intimidate Mighty Ina lead can cripple physical leads, Cacturne equally uses Leech Seed and Cotton Spore to try to force switches, Shifter uses Double Team because sometimes Little Cancer is necessary, and Sharpedo and Absol are all-out offense, with Swagger and Sword Stance respectively. It leans really well into the tricky stuff Dark can do, while also applying some solid offensive pressure, but his stuff is notably exploitable. Shifter and Cacturne have a very rough typing, and Sharpedo is frail as hell, which all around makes Sydney the weakest member of Hoenn's Elite Four by far. Phoebe is a menace. I love how out there her design is, unrelatedly. It's so unlike the other Ghost trainers we've seen before. If you know Hoenn's Ghost, you know why Phoebe is trouble. Her two Dusclops are unbelievably hard to break, the first utilizing Curse and Confuse Ray, while the second is a coverage monster with Ice Beam and Earthquake, while also whittling down PP with pressure. Her two Bayonet, while not the walls her Dusclops are, throw out Spite, Will-O-Wisp, Skill Swap, and Toxic, and with their identical levels, it's hard to tell which one is coming in, how it'll mess with its opponent, and Sableye just lacks weakness and has Attract. Everything she has isn't just difficult to go against, but can leave permanent ripples for future battles. Low PP, ticking Toxic, burns cutting down physical attackers. While not as annoyingly luck-based as predecessor Agatha, her presence can be even more terrifying for its lasting impact. Despite the issues Ice tends to face, Glacia's team is carried rather hard by her two Celio and Walrein, whose water typing aids their survivability and who love keeping Hail up to almost certainly whittle down anything the player could have, while also boosting Blizzard's accuracy. Walrein even has Sheer Cold. Given its high level, it becomes a surprisingly relevant issue. Her two Glalie are a bit less relevant, fairly exploitable with a bad typing, but can occasionally rejuvenate Hail or set up a light screen to further make the members of Spiel's family scarier. Although in general, she's a bit of a relief before the final two. Drake uses Dragons, color me surprised that he's good. Shelgon and Altaria are nothing special, the Altaria is yet another Dragon Dance set, however the two Flygon and the Salamence can be a major issue. Both are just strong. His Salamence doesn't even use Dragon Dance. Hell, outside of one Flygon having Sandstorm, and the other having the very obnoxious Sand Attack, they just have straight attacks, but very good ones. Coverage, high levels, and just being fucking good Pokemon still make them terrifying. There's one glaring flaw though, and it rhymes with nice cream, because 4 of his 5 Pokemon have a pretty nasty 4x weakness. The water that you surfed in on probably learns it, and short of a one-hit KO against the water, it's an absolutely finisher against pretty much the whole fucking team. Then there's Steven, allegedly a steel trainer. Only about half his Pokemon are that, while the other half are rocks and grounds associated with history to tie into Steven's rock collecting thing. Steven is pretty scary. His team doesn't end up with a lot of common weaknesses and has some weird secondary typings. He throws coverage around like candy and has crazy brute force. He uses a shockingly meta lead in Skarmory, who has few weaknesses and starts throwing around Toxic and Spikes to wear the player down very fast and hard off the bat, shockingly similar to its use in competitive. Claydol has general bulk and a strong stab in Earthquake and dual screens. Aggron is a bizarre set with Earthquake, Dragonclaw, Thunder, and Solar Beam, I guess in an attempt to ward off the waters and grounds that threaten the steels. He uses both fossils. Cradilly's wacky type makes it difficult to pin down with weaknesses, and Confuse Ray can force switches into Skarmory's spikes. Meanwhile, Armaldo is just a superstar hitter. Then there's his ace, Metagross, the game's second pseudo-legendary, and like Salamence, it doesn't disappoint. Steel Psychic is a great type, especially since Steel still resists Ghost and Dark this generation, leaving it only with a Fire and Ground weakness for its 9 resists and an immunity. Titanic Attack and Defense, great elsewhere. Clear Body prevents stat reductions just to make it near impossible to cheese. He doesn't even really need a strategy, just 4 massive moves, Psychic, Meteor Mash, Earthquake, and Hyper Beam, and he has one of the most threatening ace Pokemon an opponent has ever used. Steven is intense, maybe not the hardest champion ever, and obviously not super boss tier like Red, but he's a great bout of the game, and hey, Brennan or May arrives just in time to be an embarrassment. And with that, there's not a lot to do. The battle tower opens up, it's the most basic variant of the tower imaginable, and does have a few cool prizes like the Choice Band, but it's just a series of random battles in a row until you hit a wall. The ride to the tower takes place on the SS title. There's a few trainers to battle, and the incredible item Leftovers is available, but it's nothing special. Somewhat topically, at Steven's house in Moss Deep is a gift he left behind, a level 5 Beldum, Steel Psychic, Clear Body, only learns Takedown. Besides the whole Magikarp thing, it's obvious what this is. At 20 it becomes Metang, and at 45 Metagross. I've already talked about how insane Metagross is, but seriously, 135 attack, 135 defense, good special stats, amazing type, coverage out the ass. It's a shame that you get it here, where it's only useful for multiplayer for a game that nobody plays anymore. When the game starts back up after clearing the Elite Four, a news report tells of a mysterious Pokemon roaming Hoenn, thankfully using much less cruel AI than Gold, Silver, and Crystal, which won't actively avoid the player even if it's still the best Master Ball target in the game. In Sapphire, this Pokemon is Latios, in Ruby it's Latios. The two are gendered counterparts to each other. Latios the female, Latios the male, and both are pretty similar. Both are Dragon Psychic, a type with both a slew of resistances, mostly pretty great ones, and with many weaknesses. Thankfully one's less relevant than its resists. Both have Levitate, and both are pretty good. At 110 speed, both are crazy fast, and the two only differ in that Latios' stats give it a mild defensive lean, while Latios leans offensive. Even despite that, both have great specials and passable physicals, just leaning different ways. Even if Latios is usually favored for its insane ability to hit, and that's before their completely broken, event-only held item Soldew, which boosts both special stats by 50%, effectively making them a touch over 700 base stat total, and in essence making Latios' special attack just under 200 at its base. If this sounds insane, it is. If that wasn't enough, both also have their own signature moves. Latios' Miss Ball is a psychic move with a solid 70 base power, but also a literal coin flip to drop special attack, crippling special attackers. Latios' Luster Purge is the same thing, but with a coin flip to drop special defense as if it needed to be any stronger. Both are incredibly good legendaries. Despite seemingly being version exclusive, they were subject to an incredibly unique event. The Eon Ticket was the first viral event. Obtained via Nintendo Power e-reader card giveaways, the Eon Ticket allows access to Southern Island, a tiny island where the opposite Lati is available, Latios and Sapphire holding a Soldew and Latios and Ruby with the same item. The Eon Ticket had a unique property though: trade with someone who has an Eon Ticket, get one in return, and that one spreads and spreads. While this is hardly relevant in 2023, it made the event far more accessible than any other event in the pre-Wi-Fi trading days. Much like Cerulean Cave opened up in Red and Blue, a new dungeon opens up post-Elite Four, although with basically no fanfare, you just kinda gotta know. On Route 131, some rocks randomly shift away, opening access to Sky Pillar. The gimmick here is great. Alternating floors swap between crazy strong Pokemon with some crazy variety, great for post-game grinding, stuff like Claydol, Explosion, Dusclops with Curse and Will-O-Wisp, Sableye, Mawile, and Altaria fill these floors and make just getting to the top pretty difficult. On every other floor is a mock bike challenge, floors that quickly collapse and need to be biked across to maximum speed, accounting for the difficulty of steering it and with great precision to avoid taking a plunge into the prior floor. It's an incredibly difficult little reaction game, although it's notably not punishing. A few extra encounters and 10 to 15 seconds to get back up for another round. Conquering Sky Pillar at its peak is Rayquaza, a flying dragon type that serves as Groudon and Kyogre's third counterpart in a variety of ways, namely in that its ability Airlock negates the effect of weather, not dissipating it, but removing the bonus rain gives to water moves and thunder, and the nerf to fire, the opposite for sun, and the passive damage of sand and hail. In a sense, Rayquaza is just Super Salamence, a touch slower but still fast, and a touch bulkier but still not all that bulky, and with a giant 150 in each attacking stat. It gets Dragon Dance, it gets Outrage, it gets incredible coverage, Ice Beam, Flamethrower, Thunderbolt, Surf, Waterfall. It does virtually everything, and does it well. Ironically, while it does pretty much hard counter Groudon, it actually doesn't love Kyogre, as it often runs Ice moves for coverage, which shatters Rayquaza. In the battle on Sky Pillar, rests on top of its crazy strong moves make an incredibly difficult and rewarding fight. The balancing act of keeping it low on health and status is a genuine challenge that makes it incredibly rewarding to catch even if there's not much else to do after. There's one last Pokemon to touch on for now. I'll save the rest for Emeralds. The event-exclusive Jirachi, this game's Pixie Mythical, its Mew or Celebi counterpart. It's Steel Psychic like Metagross, which off the bat is a great start, and Serene Grace is the best ability ever, in my opinion. Doubling the chance a move has a secondary effect. Jirachi's Stab Iron Head has a 60% flinch chance every turn, and when bundled with stuff like Thunder Wave has led to some very wacky sets. And that's before bangers like doubling Ice Beam's freeze chance. Like its predecessor, Jirachi has a solid 100 in each stat and a massive move pool, which leads to a ton of flexibility in builds, especially when taking Serene Grace into account. Jirachi also has a signature move in Doom Desire, a significantly more powerful version of the fairly common move Future Sight, which lands a hit 3 turns after it's been selected for use. It's not very useful until Generation 5 when it actually starts to do steel type damage, where here it does typeless, and even then, Paraflinch is far and away the most consistent set Jirachi can run. Despite that, Jirachi is an adorable mythical with a ton of flexibility and use, if you can get your hands on it. Or cheat it in. I think my teams are pretty cool. In Ruby I started with Sceptile. He's well, not great, but occasionally grass comes up. It would be better in Sapphire, but I wanted to challenge myself a little. Petalburg was both my flyer and surfer. I gladly took it being a bit weak for the convenience. Hariyama was a powerhouse in general, just tanking hits and returning them back on Vital Throw, but it did take a lot of damage over time and often tended to faint eventually. Manectric was kinda just an electric, but hey, that's sometimes useful, especially in a region this wet. Aggron was another slow powerhouse, playing versatility with steel and rock moves, but being rather straightforward otherwise, and Claydol was a bit of a Swiss Army knife, Earthquake, Psychic, Ice Beam, just covering everything else I may need. This team, sans Sceptile, ended up being rather slow and bulky, which was an interesting trade-off to mess around with when it came to the big battles in the Elite Four, as damage was mostly an inevitability. In Sapphire, I instead started Blaziken, who could brute force most of what the game threw out, although it was mostly just Blaze Kick and Sky Uppercut spam. Flygon did what Flygon does, hit Earthquake usually, but also Dragon Breath and a touch of coverage. Gardevoir ended up being less interesting than I hoped, being boxed into pretty much a Thunderbolt and Psychic user, but doing it pretty well. Ludicolo is just a Pokemon with a good-ass typing, using Giga Drain to sustain its bulk, plus Surf and Ice Beam. Sableye came in surprising clutch. While its stats are low, the typing made it so consistently useful, and just being able to lay in with Ghost and Dark stuff ended up being pretty useful in a lot of situations, even if I relied on it less and less later as its stats fell off. And of course Slacking, high risk, high reward. Slacking was a free kill button on most things, but of course came with immense risk that made it my secret weapon for hard targets. Additionally, late in the game, while catching random stuff on 101 for exclusives trading, I ended up with a shiny Zigzagoon. Cute little guy. And now I get to drone on about Pokemon Special again. The Ruby and Sapphire chapter has a lot to love. The story is framed around Ruby and Sapphire's rivalry, feeling like it drives everything in the story. Day 1 in Hoenn, Ruby meets the professor's daughter. Ruby is a refined, prissy, and even slightly flamboyant contest maniac who refuses to fight. Sapphire is borderline feral, living in the woods with her Pokemon and being all in on battling. Their clash leads to a bet. 80 days to travel Hoenn and accomplish their dreams. Ruby clearing the Master Rank contest, Sapphire taking on every gym. The two stories are fairly separate, with each crossing paths with each other from time to time, but also the villainous teams Aqua and Magma. The villain team's story actually more closely resembles Emerald's. Both teams are working towards awakening their own legendaries simultaneously, clashing throughout with each other and our heroes. In the endgame, it's almost exactly the same as Groudon and Kyogre clash in Sootopolis, and Wally and Norman seek out Rayquaza to quell the battle. I suppose it was easier than just canonizing one game or the other, but more and more towards the end, the game starts making many references to Emeralds. While the gore is a bit toned down, the manga still has quite a bit of an edge. Several characters die in the big explosive endgame in pretty brutal ways, even if they're kinda ass-pulled back to life. The whole Aqua and Magma stuff does kinda overpower the Around the World in 80 Days story though. Sapphire's gym battles are flown through in the first half, a few are just handed out during the big climax, and the final one is completely off screen. Likewise, almost all of the contest stuff is shown in brief montages and glimpses. Despite this, the core of the story is the growth of the characters, perhaps the way they rub off on each other, especially Ruby, who refused to fight as a form of rebellion against his father Norman due to his perceived abandonment, but he eventually steps up to protect the people he loves, while also beginning to let go of his superficiality as he comes to love his Feebas for the beauty it has inside. But Sapphire also opens up a bit in her own ways, and the two form something of a relationship. Side characters get in on the action too. Norman goes from an antagonistic force attempting to mold his son into someone who can help him utilize Rayquaza should the need arise, to someone who accepts that his son's dreams differ from his and takes the sickly Wally under his wing. While I wish the story didn't derail as the game's story does in the legendary wankery, it's more fitting in the very shonen world of Special, which has dipped into this well before in the Gold and Silver chapter. I do feel bad saying this, but the art generally feels weaker for humans. It's mostly bias on my end. I really loved Mato's work in the first two chapters, and the new style is decidedly more generic. However, I think the Pokemon artwork is still gorgeous and the action is still pretty strong, if a bit cluttered by the nature of how chaotic the story gets. Once you have Groudon and Kyogre smashing the land while the Reggies shoot lasers, obtained in a gigantic setup that starts from very nearly the first chapter, that kinda blew my mind, and the entire set of gym leaders, the Elite Four, and the protagonists getting in on the action, it all gets a little messy. The Ruby and Sapphire chapters are very strong, a bit of a clusterfuck, but in a way that feels sheerly enjoyable for its runtime. The game's format that feels weird there just works as light shonen fodder for the most part. Pokemon Sapphire wasn't my first Pokemon game. Crystal and a few spin-offs beat it to the punch, but by the time I played Sapphire I was far more cognizant. My starter wasn't named it didn't use 4 fire moves, and I recognized how good Kyogre was and used it throughout the game once I got it. Despite that, I'm not sure how to feel about Ruby and Sapphire in a lot of ways. It's a shift that I feel very mixed about. Mechanically, the games are at the cusp of greatness, added complexity, abilities, more interesting moves and mechanics, min-maxing gimmicks that create extremely unique gameplay experiences. The games are really coming into their own and are only held back by Game Freak's fear of overwhelming the player, obfuscating these improved mechanics, hiding the interesting parts of breeding natures, neglecting double battles. The added randomness can be a pain, but given that Generation 3 multiplayer is a dead game outside of a few dozen people on Showdown anyway, it can basically be looked past, this time anyway. Where Hoenn feels weird is the world. For every area I love, the ashy routes in the north, the hot springs of Lavaridge, there's at least one that feels like it was crammed in despite itself. An entire desert, an Ewok village, a bunch of logs in the ocean. The virtual tourism aspect of Pokémon is thrown off. We no longer go to the real world with some slight twists on reality, but sometimes just leave it for a fantasy. Ones that can be interesting in their own right, like Sootopolis, but ones that make the world feel almost like an amusement park. It's not inherently inferior, but for me it loses some of the magic that Johto especially had, a world based on a vacation the designers took instead of an imaginative world of their childhood. There's also the water problem. Yeah, it's a meme. But it's a meme for a reason. Water routes are something that these games have never really figured out even after this. Shallow encounter pools, few interesting mechanics. Even if this game has one route that mixes it up pretty well, just the unabashed amount of time you spend fighting almost exclusively one type, especially in Sapphire where the back half of the game feels like a never-ending parade of water types, gets exhausting. Especially in runs when you don't have a solid electric, as many of these are grass neutral. In general, it does come together. The game is well paced and balanced beyond that ending stretch, and the level curve never gets extremely jarring until maybe Steven, so it's at least a smooth ride, if one that gets a bit tedious. The story is an even bigger hang-up for me though. A message about the dangers of taking good intentions too far could work, but it's far too silly. The villains are far too stupid, the message is too blunt, the conclusion too rushed. And it's only made worse looking back as it would go on to be the template for the entire series going forward. Designs across the region are great, unambiguously. Generation 3 has a strong selection of new Pokemon, maybe to the same degree that the first two generations had, from fan favorites like Mudkip, Kyogre, Groudon, Gardevoir I guess, Flygon, Metagross, to less appreciated ones I love. Duskull's in my top 5, the adorable Shitmonchan Echo, Shedinja. There's so few misses in Generation 3 that I could probably put them on one hand, cast form, and bitch about the desert as I may, Pokemon all have a place. Duskull adds a somber feel to Mount Pyre, Cacnea is right at home in the desert, Spoink can traverse the slopes of Jagged Path. There's so much thought put into where Pokemon are placed that I can't help but admire it. Like its dual villains, Ruby and Sapphire are two extreme opposites. Some of the highest highs the series had yet, face to face with some of, in my opinion, the lowest. It's a game I love, but can't help but feel that a well of issues hold it back. That's obviously not the end of the story though. While the prior third versions felt like slight remixes of their respective originals, the third game in this bunch had ambitions far beyond those of the first few, and in some senses attempted to address at least some of my issues with the game. A year after Ruby and Sapphire was Fire Red and Leaf Green, and a year following that Emerald. As I said before, this isn't your typical third version. The Japanese version of Blue shuffled some encounters around, Yellow added a bad gimmick and made the gym leaders' teams worse, and Crystal put a bit of focus on Suicune. By comparison, Emerald is a whole new game. The storyline is almost entirely redone, mechanics from Fire Red and Leaf Green are carried over, and new mechanics altogether are added. Several new areas are created, some small areas that introduce returning Pokemon, some elaborate events, and beyond that, an expansive post-game that has become the ideal for many. Blue and Crystal felt like alternate options, Yellow was a ROM hack, Emerald is a complete reinvention that feels like a replacement for its predecessor in a lot of ways. My favorite gameplay change is the focus on double battles. Ruby and Sapphire had like 5, but in Emerald they're everywhere. In a new twist, the player can be spotted by 2 trainers at once. As opposed to doubles being limited to static opponents standing in place, nearly every route has at least one place where this can occur. It's important to note that this turns double battles into an option. Tackle the opponents one by one if your team isn't configured for doubles or lacks spread moves, tackle them together if you got a plan. That it's a choice makes it even better. This increased focus on doubles is a huge benefit on team building. It's viable to run things that exist as double tricks, it's viable to run Pokemon that only act as non-offensive double support, Pulsel and Mine become somewhat viable, Volbeat and Illumis, Earthquake and Surf become even more valuable, and on and on. This alone makes Emerald feel like a very fresh experience before anything else. Another cool mechanical addition, secondary effects for abilities when in the field. As of this game, Compound Eyes can be used to increase the chance a Pokemon is holding an item when it's caught in the wild. Flame Body and Magma Armor have the time it takes for an egg to hatch, Slugma just became top tier. Static can force encounters with electric type, Sticky Hold and Suction Cups make fish bite more when fishing, and a good handful more too. Most of them manipulate the amount of encounters you see. These are mostly passive bonuses, but I think it's a neat mechanic when it allows you to just passively gain a bonus. I wish that even more abilities in the series had it, but even the few handfuls we got throughout the years is fine. Match Call now exists too, working much like the cell phone did in Crystal. Periodically, characters will call for a rematch and have a small chance of giving items after. It's not a lot, but it does make grinding up new Pokemon a bit easier, even if the calls can be a bit annoying. Speaking of rematches, Emerald is a bit ahead of its time in that, introducing full rematch teams for every leader. These rematches are all double battles and get progressively harder every time, up to 4. And all of these slowly incorporate Pokemon from generations 1 and 2. Roxanne, for example, makes use of Aerodactyl, Kabutops, Amistar, Golem, and Steelix. These both allow the earlier leaders especially to shine more, but also serve as nice experience bumps, even if they only come after beating the Elite Four. Most gyms, on that note, also receive not only new designs, but most leaders have improved and generally more difficult teams. Roxanne has an additional Geodude, Brawly adds a Metatite to his team, Watson replaces his Magnemite with both an Electrike and Manectric, serving as his new ace. Flannery replaces a Slugma with a Numel and Camerupt, although Torkoal remains her ace. The AI in Norman's gym is improved and won't always go for a turn 1 item, and Norman himself drops a Slacking for a Spinda and a very nasty Bellydrome Linoon. Winona drops Swellow for a Swablu and a Tropius, and her gym is substantially more complex in its puzzle. Tate and Liza's gym is entirely redone with a gimmick based around pressing switches to rotate sections of the floor, plus substantially adds to their team, leaving the much less vulnerable Gladeol and Xatu before their Lunatone and Solrock. It's funny that everything they have is still Earthquake immune. Meanwhile, in Sutopolis, Wallace is replaced entirely with the less flamboyant Gayman Juan. Another water leader who replaces the wimpy Sea King with an equally underwhelming Crawdont, and Milotic for an incredibly hard to crack Rest and Double Team Kingdra, which can quickly get out of hand. These changes also extend to the Elite Four. Drake drops a Flygon for Kingdra, again, and Steven is entirely absent, replaced by Wallace, as if we needed more water, who has an admittedly cool team with a bulky Wailord and Tentacruel, a very difficult to deal with Ludicolo, Wishcash, Gyarados, and of course his Milotic. The variety of secondary typings here means that neither Grass or Electric is a catch-all solution, and when combined with the general bulk of many of these, he becomes surprisingly hard to deal with. Steven appears throughout the game. In Moss Deep he's fought alongside in a double battle, but he's largely relegated to being an extremely difficult super boss a la Red. After clearing the Elite Four, he can be found in a new section of Meteor Falls using the same team he did in Ruby and Sapphire, but at a substantially higher level. Various other areas beyond Meteor Falls have seen slight tweaks too, in encounters and design. 117 is the most notable as it gives an even longer and straighter line for egg farming. Some cool notable encounters that were moved about include Meryl on 104, allowing access to it substantially sooner, even before Roxanne, swapping Poochyena and Zigzagoon on most routes, making Poochyena more common. Both fossils are available eventually, which is a bit of a relief, and the same is true for the prior game's box legendaries, which were formerly exclusive. On that note, before moving on to the story in new areas, I suppose I should cover the version exclusives, or exclusions. Only 2 of these are shared with the prior game's exclusives, thankfully, with Emerald missing out on Zangoose from Ruby while getting Seviper, and Lunatone from Sapphire while keeping Solrock. It's a bit unfortunate that Emerald needs both of the other games to complete it, well those only needed each other, but it is what it is. This also means that some of the exclusive pairs from before are both here. Lotad and Seedot's lines share almost every route they appear on, with Seedot at extremely low encounter rates, while Lotad is far more common. Both Mauville and Sableye appear, with Sableye appearing in more areas, but Mauville crammed in too, and of course the legendaries, both Groudon and Kyogre available in one save, and the player gets to choose whether Latios or Latios roams Hoenn, relegating the other to being found on Southern Island. As for the other exclusions, Emerald loses the Surskit line in favor of its 1% encounters going to C-Dot, no big loss there honestly. The Meditite line is absent, more of a loss as they're rather unique, and Rosalia is missing. While I do like it, it's relatively underpowered and way more common and powerful in this game's follow-up when it gets a new evolution. Emerald also has a solid selection of Pokemon that weren't present in Ruby or Sapphire via a good handful of new areas, although I'll get to all that shortly. Needless to say, Emerald, even before the extra 30-ish Pokemon, is a way stronger roster than the other two. The few exclusions are relatively minor, and the legendary situation pushes it completely over the edge. Let's get into the story and new stuff. Up until the final hours, things are largely the same. The changes to the game, beyond what I talked about a short bit ago, are largely based on how Aqua and Magma are utilized. Each are working towards their goal of awakening their respective legendary, and encounters now alternate between the two, with the sea-related events going to Aqua, the base outside of Lily Cove, the undersea cavern, while Magma gets Meteor Falls and Mount Chimney. While Kyogre is found in the same spot it once was, Groudon is instead located more fittingly beneath Mount Chimney. It's not to say nothing else has changed though. For one, all the contest halls except for Lily Cove have been replaced by battle tents. The Slateport one being based around using rental Pokemon, the Verdanturf one being a fairly standard battle facility, and the Fallarbor Town one centering on a unique scoring system where Pokemon go 1 versus 1 and are graded on their accuracy, use of offensive moves, and remaining HP, all of which serve as a form of practice for the upcoming post-game. It does mean that unfortunately, contests feel like much less of a journey, instead being relegated to a late game minigame, which only furthers the perception that contests are an afterthought. Route 111 also has a few significant additions. Trainer Hill right next to the Windstraight House serves as a new battle facility, working almost exclusively as Fire Red and Leaf Green's Trainer Tower did. A series of double battles with no healing between that asks the player to clear it quickly for mediocre prizes. To call it a bit underwhelming would be an understatement. The desert also has a very small mini-dungeon, Mirage Tower, a short 4-floor dungeon that only features Sandshrew and Trapinch, but also serves as a tiny version of Sky Pillar, using the same Mach Bike challenge, although significantly less intense, and instead offering a choice for one of the two fossils, with the other being stored until the post-game. The big shifts start to take place in the game's last few hours. Before going into Aqua's Lily Cove hideout, Magma gets their own dungeon hidden on Jagged Pass. It's got a bit of its own flavor as opposed to the more complicated teleporter maze of the Aqua hideout. The Magma base is more of a blunt instrument, a relatively straightforward dungeon with a few side areas loaded with not only Magmas to fight, including their leader Maxie, but also features wild encounter with Torkoal, Geodude, and Graveler, 3 pretty bulky Pokemon, making it more of an endurance test than anything else. At the end of the cave, of course, Groudon is awakened but disappears. After defeating this base, Aqua's, including the Moss Deep Gym, Team Magma attempts to steal rocket fuel from the Space Center because fire. A small event that's highlighted by a double battle alongside Steven, and this battle manages to get through to Maxie. After doing the underwater cavern, Archie's absolutely shocked to realize he can't control Kyogre, and Maxie laments not being able to stop him from awakening it, having come to his senses first. The legendary duo began to fight in Sootopolis, with the weather in Eastern Hoenn swapping between sun and rain every 30 or so seconds. Going to Sootopolis gives some very funny reactions from the crowd who have gathered to watch, with people picking sides and making bets, which kinda undermines the gravity of the situation, but is pretty amusing. In the Cave of Origin, Wallace directs the player to Sky Pillar. Rayquaza's ability to shut down the weather, hence its ability, allows it to shut down the fight. Sky Pillar on the first visit is intact. The Mach Bike challenge isn't necessary to complete the story. I suppose it was seen as a bit too cruel. Coming to Sky Pillar at this time does have the unfortunate consequence, though, of nerfing the Pokemon here. All the same stuff is here, but tends to be about 15 levels weaker. Given the dungeon was the strongest place to grind in the game, it does kinda hurt the Pokédex grind significantly in the endgame. Awakening Rayquaza leads to it going to quell the fighting. The cutscene is super cool given the limitations, but it is kinda odd that all the legendaries just go their separate ways after. The player can immediately go back through Sky Pillar, now with the Mach Bike segments intact, to get Rayquaza, while the other two disappear until after the Elite Four. When they do pop back up, they create their own caves around the region. Terra Cave for Groudon, Marine Cave for Kyogre, each of which can appear on 4 different routes and can be tracked via the Weather Institute, thus allowing the complete set all in one game. This more or less wraps up story changes outside of Wallace's promotion. The game plays out roughly exactly as before after this. Is it an improvement? Maybe a little. The villain teams are still goobers, and their erratic plans become even stranger when jumbled together. However, I like Maxie coming to his senses sooner, and the climax is way more exciting, especially that big, beautiful cutscene. Despite this, most of the same issues that plague Ruby and Sapphire persist. After the Magma hideout, you dive into an awful lot of water battles, even more so as you're required to surf out to Sky Pillar, and Wallace is now the champion. The pacing both explodes and nosedives in the final hours, kinda simultaneously. However, Emerald also doesn't end there. The postgame in Ruby and Sapphire was more or less relegated to Sky Pillar and the lobbies. However, a substantial amount of new areas crop up in Emerald. For one, Altering Cave, located on 103 and identical to the one in Fire Red and Leaf Green. By default, it only contains Zubat, but an event that was never held could change what Pokemon are found in it. Notably, every Pokemon that could be found in Altering Cave can now be found elsewhere in Emerald. One such place, many of these can be found, is in the Safari Zone's expansion. 2 additional areas that add a significant amount of Pokemon to the game. One such as Hoot Hoot, who makes its only Generation 3 appearance here. Normal Flying and Becoming Noctowl at 20. Insomnia and Kenai are both solid abilities if situational, but Noctowl is sorely awkward. Its high HP and special defense don't do a lot for it if it can't retaliate, and its terrible physical stats and mediocre special attack leave it an awkward do-nothing Pokemon. Ledyba and Spinarak reappear here. Both evolutions are thoroughly underwhelming for being in the postgame, especially when it comes to the extremely difficult postgame battle facilities we'll reach soon. Mareep was one of the Pokemon that could be found in Altering Cave. Ampharos remains a solid electric type, although there's plenty of good options that also exist in this game. Aipom remains weak in every battle, and with Pickup's nerf and its late appearance, it unfortunately has no real role to fill. Sunkern is basically a joke Pokemon. Its stats were for a long time the worst in the series, a flat 30 and everything, and when it evolves into Sunflora by Sunstone, it remains bad. Plenty of better Pokemon have Chlorophyll, most of them having a secondary type to compensate for Grass's bad offensive presence, and even in Sun it only gets up to a paltry 60 speed. Its special attack is rather good, so it's a shame it struggles so much to do anything. Wooper and its evolution Quagsire remain rather good thanks to the spectacular water-ground combination, just one problem. It now has competition with the harder hitting Wishcash and, Swampert, however remains fairly serviceable. Pineco, another member of the Altering Cave Club, returns, and Fortress's Bug Steel type remains incredible. Paired with Spike's Toxic and Explosion, it remains an absolute defensive landmine that can perfectly cripple opponents. Gliger's best attribute is his wacky ground flying typing. 2 great immunities and only scared of water and ice, its stacked defensive stat means it's kinda hard to deal with, and Sandvale can make that issue even worse. Although Hypercutter doesn't hurt it either. However, its low offensive stats and lack of utility hold it back as a novelty that can't capitalize, although the tides of fate soon turn for the little guy. Snubbull is pure normal and has Intimidate and Runaway, although when it evolves at 23 in a Granbull, it will always have Intimidate. It's a good start. At 120 attack, it's quite the neutral monster, and loves the additional physical coverage Gen 3 brought. However, its other stats are nothing to write home about, and its speed is devastating. It's a Pokemon that can be incredible given support, but it needs a ton of support to get there. Shuckle is still a bad gimmick. I mean, what else is there to say? Teddy Ursa is found here, and its evolution Ursaring remains a monster. While it is a slow normal like Granbull, its even higher attack and generally better bulk, paired with incredible ability and guts, make it a surprisingly powerful neutral hitter. Both Remoraid and its evolution Octillery are available here. I'm probably the only person to ever actually wade through the horrible emerald fishing mechanics to get the 1% Octillery. It's a serviceable water type with great attacking stats and some fun tricks in a game that has 8 million water options, at least one of which you would need to get here. Houndour is another one that returns from Altering Cave. Houndoom remains quite simply an incredibly strong special attacker with a solid typing if a bit on the frail side. Stantler returns from the same cave, the last one for a bit. Intimidate is basically the only saving grace that this otherwise awkward Pokemon has. Finally, and boy am I glad to escape the Safari Zone and his headache mechanics again, Miltank, or as I call her, Female Tauros. Normal type, bulky as hell, and packing milk drain to keep its health high. Boosted even further with Thick Fat, Miltank is a massive wall with attacking stats that are serviceable for wearing things down while it does. Pretty good in general. The Safari Zone is a lot. We actually hit a majority of the new Pokemon in Emerald already, so things slow down here, so let's just roll through what's left on the mainland. The Desert Underpass is found just outside of Fallarbor, and as its name somewhat implies, the other fossil can be found here in the postgame, and that's cool and all, but the real prize is Ditto. Ruby and Sapphire did not have Ditto. That makes breeding things for the Pokedex, should the need arise, a giant pain in the ass, especially for one-offs like the fossils that have a chance to be male. Ditto is a band-aid on the breeding bullet wound, but an invaluable one. Emerald also has a reward for completely filling out the Hoenn Dex, which includes every non-mythical Pokemon that was present in Ruby and Sapphire. It isn't necessary to get any of the Emerald exclusive Pokemon. Upon completing this monumental task, and it is very monumental, Professor Birch offers the player one of 3 Pokemon, Chikorita, Cynical, or Totodile, a wonderful reward for overcoming such a Herculean task, although admittedly perhaps a bit too brutal to bother with. The remakes of Ruby and Sapphire would make this reward substantially easier to obtain. At 16, Chikorita becomes Bayleaf, and at 32, Meganium, all pure grass with the typical starter ability Overgrow. Meganium has lived in a perpetually unfortunate state of being a do-nothing wall with some solid support moves. However, if there's a time for it, it's here, where it can serve as a screen setter and general support role while covering for something more offensive, and in a game where Sun for Synthesis and Solar Beam is more available than it ever will be after this, it's, decently useful in some situations. Cynical is Pure Fire and becomes Cool Lava at 14, before ending at Typhlosion at 36, of course with Blaze. Man has the same exact stats as Charizard, but lacks flying. Typhlosion is a real solid, fast special attacker. It doesn't do much beyond shoot hot fire, and through tutoring gets Electric Punch, but sometimes that's all you need. Totodile's Pure Water, Torrent, 18 Crocodile, 30 for Alligator. Its physical leave still leaves it hanging for one more generation, but it has a substantial amount of new physical stuff to throw around, like Brick Break, Rock Slide, Earthquake. But its true time to shine will be a generation on from here. Okay, I've stalled enough. The real heart and soul of Emerald, if you ask most people anyway. Throughout the game, this dude named Scott frequently shows up, mostly just to say, hey kid, you got potential. As it turns out, he's the owner of a titanic battle facility on an island, the Battle Frontier. The island is rather large, it kinda has to be, as it houses 7 battle facilities, each with a unique gimmick, a Frontier Brain, the boss of the facility, and shops to spend currency earned from these battle facilities, BP, including TM shops, shops for rare held items, including the first appearance of the Choice Band, which locks the Pokemon into one move for the whole battle because them a 50% attack buff and is wildly popular and competitive, move tutors, and general goods like vitamins, plus random NPCs who check IVs or just add a bit of flavor. And that's before getting to the small optional dungeon. Before I touch the facilities though, let's hit the last remaining few Pokemon before the events. A trade can be performed here, a Skitty for a Meowth. Persian is a solid if thoroughly outclassed normal by this point in the series, unfortunately. An odd tree blocks access to the ocean surrounding the island, and the Wilmer Pail, used to help berries grow, can be used to get it to spring into battle. Much like Gen 2, it's Sudowoodo. Pure Rock, Sturdy is almost a nothing ability in this game, and Rockhead, which while allowing recoilless double edge is rather situational. Usually Sudowoodo would rather lay in with Rock Slide. Sudowoodo is dangerously min-maxed, having good attack and defense but being dreadful everywhere else. Sturdy's buff next generation makes this slightly less painful, but Sudowoodo is extremely difficult for very little reward, as opposed to having something similar but stronger in stats and type like Rhydon. Artesian Cave can be entered from the water. I'm not exactly sure what the point is, as the cave just has one of each vitamin, and the only Pokemon inside is Smeargle, although Smeargle is extremely useful competitively for its ability to do everything, really, since the only move it learns, Sketch, can copy any move in the game, and that means Smeargle is the ultimate Swiss Army knife. This also unfortunately happens to be the best grinding spot in the game. Quick Claw allows significantly weaker Pokemon to force level 50 Smeargle to leer for 40 turns while they whittle it away for maximum experience gain. And that's it, everything before the events, besides the facilities. So let's get into the facilities, the real juicy post-game stuff. I'm gonna be honest, it does very little for me. I never had Emerald as a kid, or Platinum, and when I finally got into competitive, it was when Black and White were new and Showdown was beginning to come into its own. But I do find their attempts at twisting the Pokemon formula pretty fascinating. Every facility can be challenged in singles or doubles mode, and while both give battle points, which allows for some of the double strategies I've touched on to be usable, the Frontier Brains only show up in singles, despite the fact that doubles is the official competitive format because Game Freak. I guess perhaps they thought doubles was too easy to cheese and therefore too difficult to make a challenge, I don't know. Let's start complicated. The Battle Tower. Did I say complicated? I meant it's a basic Battle Street competition with randomized opponents, therefore it's the most reasonable one as your team can be reasonably expected to play through it. The Brain Annabelle also plays a fairly reasonable competitive team in both battles. Each Brain is fought twice, once with their Silver team and another run through with their Gold team. Her Alakazam uses all 3 elemental punches to cover most possibilities, and Bright Powder because accuracy manipulation is fun. Her Entei is a relatively simple Calm Mind and Fire Blast set, and her Ace Snorlax is a rather nasty Quick Claw set with Belly Drum. Later on, she trades up Entei for Raikou with a similar set, and it's just a better Pokemon. She also brings in a Recover Latios because being unkillable is fun and gives her Snorlax a Chesto Berry to immediately wake up from rest. Her team definitely loves to play with setting up and sitting on extremely hard to kill stuff. Also, you may notice these guys love legendaries, and no, I'm not sure if her just having Raikou and Entei is canon given their confirmed one-off Pokemon. The Battle Tower is a very serviceable facility, no extra twists, no flair. It's a really solid test of the core gameplay and hypothetically a cool intro to competitive. However, it suffers a lot from the issues that Game Freak loves to force on players. The EV system is both never explained, weirdly convoluted, and because it's basically automatic, your main party through the story will almost never be viable unless you've taken a lot of time out. The IV system is similarly opaque, and even the checker in the battle facility only vaguely alludes to what your stats look like. A team more or less needs to be bred for dozens of hours in order to stumble into optimal IVs in nature, EV train for many after that, and then level to 50 to stand a chance, as the brains use optimal EV spreads, natures, and on the gold rank have 31 IVs in most of their stats. The system is basically inaccessible for all but the most dedicated. Maybe you can squeak through silver rank with some dedication and luck, but most people are just going to abandon this for newer games with more transparent, manipulable mechanics for training competitive Pokemon. Granted, all this is part of the appeal for some people. These facilities are a real test of every aspect in the game, and for some people, that's pretty irresistible. On the other end of the training nightmare is the most accessible facility, the Battle Factory, primarily because it's based on rentals. The player begins with 3 rentals, and the opponents all pick from the same pool. After each round, the player has a chance to take one of the defeated opponent's Pokemon and swap it for one of their own, with later opponents having higher chances of having strong Pokemon like the legendary trios from Generation 1 and 2, the Lotties and pseudo-legendaries, as well as having higher IVs in general. Even Factory had Nolan plays by the same rules, using a randomly selected set of rentals that make the mode mostly accessible, even if a glitch causes the player's Pokemon to have extremely low IVs. And if the random factor makes the game much more volatile, as you may just not get what you need to round out a team. It's still a cool mode and definitely the easiest of the towers to use as an intro to Pokemon's more complex side. The Battle Arena works like the Fallarbor Battle Tent, that is to say, weirdly. Pokemon are sent out in the order they're registered and can't be switched, facing off in 1 vs 1 matches the last 3 turns. Points are given in 3 areas. 1 point each turn the Pokemon uses an offensive move, minus 1 point for using defensive moves like Protect and Fake Out, 1 point each time a move actually lands, 2 for a super effective hit and minus 1 for not very effective hits, and percentage of HP remaining, the Pokemon with less points faints. Although a knockout is an automatic win as well. After completing the first 3 turns, or a knockout occurring, the next Pokemon in order is sent out to repeat the process until one player can't go on. It's essentially a coverage test where you need as broad a moveset as possible to ensure you can clear anything the game throws at you. It does also mean that luck is a pretty big factor. Bad luck on an opponent's lead can sweep your first 2 Pokemon and leave you dead to rights. All this is really exploitable too, as you know what order Arena Tycoon Greta will send her Pokemon in. In her silver battle, she uses the absurdly hard-hitting Heracross, a bulky leftovers Umbreon that's hard to take down. It also uses Confuse Ray, a very popular move in this facility as it just kills your accuracy points like it's nothing. And she ends with, of course, Bright Powder Shedinja. If you didn't happen to have a way to hit it, you've lost. You need to plan around your third Pokemon always having some answer for this and praying Bright Powder doesn't pull through. In her gold battle, her Umbreon becomes Chesto Rest, her HP points are nearly guaranteed, a bulky leftovers Gengar with Destiny Bond just in case, and Spore Breloom if that wasn't enough. Arena is definitely an odd format. It's a somewhat interesting idea, but it tends to be obnoxious to say the least, with a bunch of paralysis and confusion and sleep moves being thrown around to prevent play as you can't switch. Even against the AI, it's a pretty tedious and brutal affair, and I can't even imagine what it would be like if this format had actually been available for multiplayer. It's a format where cheese is king, and that's an exhausting concept. In a relative sense, the Battle Dome is fairly straightforward, but with a neat little strategy layer on top. Framed as a best of 16 tournament, like all facilities, the player registers 3 Pokemon, but can only choose 2 to take into battle. Although before making their selection, they view their opponent's trainer card. It shows their 3 options, hints at their seed, a hidden value based on various factors like their Pokemon's base stats, which determines which CPU wins in battles without the player, but also hints at how strong they are. Their playing style is described, this essentially says what kind of moves they prefer, offense, defense, status, and so on, and lastly highlights their strong and weak stats. This is determined by their Pokemon's EVs. If they have lots of Pokemon with high attack, they'll be labeled as such, same with HP, special defense, and so on, while also noting their weakest stats. This ends up making it resemble Team Preview, as would be seen starting in Generation 6 competitive scene, where each player can see the other's team before a match starts, and it shifts the strategy from planning for everything to attempting to figure out what your opponent will use and counterpicking against it. While it isn't a huge mechanical shift like the other facilities, it adds a nice unintrusive bit of strategy on top. Dome's Tucker definitely plays into being hard to plan for. His silver team is Swampert, Salamence, and Charizard with good sets. Rock hypothetically deals with 2 of these, but should he choose Swampert against that call, it's gonna hurt. His gold team uses Leftovers Swampert, Quick Claw Metagross, and a nasty Calm Mind Rest Latias. Again, Dark is a good pick here, but all 3 of his Pokemon are crazy strong regardless. Dome is a good facility, a simple twist on standard battles that isn't intrusive, has a good bit of strategy, and was honestly pretty forward thinking in terms of competitive mechanics. Nobody can say the Battle Pike doesn't look cool from the outside. The Sapphire building is slick if a bit bug-eyed. The Pike has an odd gimmick that turns everything into a bit of a die roll. Every time the player advances, they're giving a choice between 3 rooms. An NPC will hint at the content of one of them, while the other 2 are blind shots. Even then, each hint has a positive and negative outcome, so it's a gamble regardless. These rooms can be a single battle, a double battle, a hard single battle with healing afterwards. The trainer will use better Pokemon and better trained Pokemon, but after clearing it will fully heal the player's party. A room for wild Pokemon, all of which are fairly dangerous and mostly exist in an attempt to spread status. Toxic and Glare Viper, Toxic and Hypnosis Milotic, Toxic and Will-O-Wisp Dusclops, Toxic and Explosion Electrode, Spore, Stun Spore, and Poison Powder Breloom, and a classic Wobbuffet. All of these with potential to kill runs, and no, you cannot catch a fully evolved Milotic here. Sorry. A room can be empty, just a free pass. A man in the room can attempt to status 1 to 3 of your Pokemon if possible with any major status condition. And finally, heals for 1, 2, or all 3 of your Pokemon. Pike Queen Lucy has an oddball team, at least for her silver team. I know Viper is kind of her thing, so I'll give it a pass, but the Shuckle? She basically makes up for it with the ridiculous leftovers and recover Milotic anyway, because of course. Just to cap it off, on the gold team, she uses Viper, Explosion Steelix, and Dragon Dance Gyarados. She ain't fucking around. The Pike is a bit too random for me. When you get lucky in high roll, you don't have to play the game. When you don't, it's constantly dumping you with status and attempting to make the game as miserable as possible. Even when you get to Lucy, you may already be crippled by the journey there, and it just makes it kinda tedious. The Battle Palace sucks. It just sucks flat out. Pokemon battle on their own with their nature determining their odds of using an offensive, defensive, or status move. If they can't use a move of the chosen category, they do nothing. Pokemon need to be custom built for this facility to work around the nature mechanics, and then you sit and watch for multiple hours as your Pokemon constantly misplay, hoping that they eventually stumble their way to the end. Palace Maven Spencer doesn't play softball either. Crobat, Slaking, and Lapras the first time, all with extremely optimal natures for this RNG mess, and for his gold team he pulls out Arcanine, Slaking, and Suicune. Again, all brutal sets with perfect natures. The Palace is miserable. It's a boring long grind watching 2 Pokemon misplay against each other, and because of its wacky mechanics requiring hours of grinding to make Pokemon specifically for it, it's just an overall miserable experience. The battle pyramid is unique to say the least, centering on wild battles before anything else. Each of the 7 floors is a largely darkened maze with the goal of reaching the staircase for the next while dealing with the incredibly obnoxious wild encounters picked from one of 20 pools. One pool, for example, contains Pokemon that spam paralysis moves, one only has Pokemon with trapping abilities, one with only ice types, and so on. And no, you can't catch them. It ends up being a gamble. Sometimes you clear a floor no problem off a good type advantage, other times your whole team gets burned. Like a lot of stuff in the Battle Frontier, it's an RNG nightmare. Pyramid King Brandon is an asshole too. In his silver battle, he uses all 3 Reggies. Wait, where did these come from? I own them all. His gold battle, he uses the Kanto legendary birds. While all of these have flaws, they're also Pokemon with big numbers and really strong points, especially the birds. The pyramid is the most unique idea in the Frontier. It's more RNG hell, unfortunately, but it can be kinda neat to see what shows up, and it feels generally great to find the exit fast and progress quickly. Overall, the Battle Frontier has some unique ideas, but a lot of them feel held back by just being so cruel and random. Whether it's the misplays of the palace or getting your whole team poisoned in the Pike. That and the Titanic barrier to entry, obfuscated mechanics, and a lack of good grinding spot makes, and I can't bring myself to actually complete the Frontier. Removed from nostalgia, as I never had Emerald, I find it an interesting attempt to explore more complicated mechanics in Pokemon, but largely the advent of online battling on cartridge and on simulator has largely replaced the experience this could have given me. Emerald also has a good handful of events, some old, some new. The Eon Ticket event returns, with the only change being what's encountered, kinda. As the player chooses whether Latias or Latios roams, thus whichever they don't choose will be at Southern Island. 2 events also return from Fire Red and Leaf Green, the Naval Rock event where Lugia and Ho could be encountered, and the Birth Island where Deoxys is found. The Deoxys event has 2 important things to discuss. In Fire Red, Deoxys was always in attack form and in Leaf Green defense. Its last two forms exist in these games. Ruby and Sapphire leave it in its normal form. Like every form, it's psychic with pressure. Normal actually isn't that normal. It's a slightly less min-max attack form, slightly more defensive and slightly less offensive, but still practically a huge glass cannon. However, at that point you may as well just play attack form because the drop from 50 in the defenses to 20 isn't that impactful relatively, where the extra attack is definitely a game changer. It's not bad, but it's Deoxys' worst form. Speed form, which Deoxys becomes in Emerald, effectively when caught through this event, actually ends up being the most balanced, with 95 in both attacking stats and 90 in both defenses, which is decent enough, and its crazy 180 speed is unmatched. It was for a good while the best Uber suicide lead for setting hazards and stuff, but it also puts out a decent amount of offensive pressure in most scenarios. Lastly, there's an all-new event just for Emerald, the first proper Mew event. The old sea map can be used to reach Faraway Island. Given what the journals in Cinnabar Mansion said in Red and Blue, this island is most likely Guinea, and a sign written, presumably by Mr. Fuji from Lavender, seems to confirm this. The island has a small gimmick. Mew will move around in the tall grass and needs to be cornered before it can be battled. At only level 30, it's not much of a threat, but it also notably can be cheesed very hard. One of its 4 moves is Transform, and in Generation 3, Transform copies catch rate. Turn Mew into a Wurmple, and it's game over. The event is fun. Mew never really got its distribution in Gen 1 or its remake, and was absent in Gen 2 entirely. Mew is given this really neat, simple event that ties in the lore around its discovery and has a cute little gimmick. It's weird that it's an Emerald event instead of a Fire and Leaf Green event, but I can't really complain about more. Okay, damn. I think that's it. My Emerald team isn't that complicated, I just used funny stuff. Swampert is a no-brainer for such a doubles-focused game. I mean, it also is in singles, but you know. Swalot is a good utility in doubles, spreading toxic and eventually getting leftovers to just become a great passive wall. Torgal's Flamethrower proved to be consistently useful, but also got surprising mileage out of being my status spreader via Body Slam's paralysis chance. Swallow is just a good-ass bird, plus avoids Swampert's Earthquake. Solrock hits some important gaps with Psychic and Rock Tomb, plus has Levitate, which is also good in doubles with Swampert too. And lastly, Breloom is crazy with Sky Uppercut and can top itself off with Giga Drain. Plus Stun Spore and even Effect Spore can cripple more obnoxious threats and aid in catching. I also got a shiny Smeargle. I was grinding stuff in Artesian Cave and out he popped. Really solid little guy he is, although being post-game only, he didn't get to see much use. I'm admittedly pretty mixed on Special's Emerald chapter. At just over 30 chapters, it feels exceedingly rushed for how much ground it covers, while also having an issue unique to itself, being too gamey. Emerald follows Emerald as he challenges the 7 Battle Frontier facilities, while simultaneously tracking and chasing Jirachi, who is awoken for 1 week, and attempting to keep it out of the hands of Guile Hideout, a new mysterious villain cloaked in armor. If that sounds like a lot for 40 chapters, it's because it is. This thing moves fast. Much of the Frontier stuff is pretty well skimmed, save the early parts of the factory where Emerald discovers non-rental Pokemon mixed into the rental pool that eventually form his party. Sceptile and Dusclops primarily, but also the Sudowoodo. While the action is still fairly strong, a lot of important fights are relegated to off-screen or extremely abridged action snippets. The other issue is a complete overdoing of the tying into game mechanics. Pokemon are directly referred to as taking turns in battle. Each facility actually uses its game rules to sometimes clunky effect, and creativity is largely absent from fights. It becomes a rather straightforward version of fights from the game, Emerald and his opponent going back and forth taking turns to deal damage. In the prior chapters of the manga especially, battles were often resolved through creative use of the environment or with off-the-wall strategies, and it kept the series dynamic and exciting. Here it all feels a little bit stiff even when outside of the battle facilities, and even worse in them. I like Emerald's arc to an extent, opening his heart to his new permanent Pokemon instead of thinking of them as tools borrowed from Crystal, but a lot goes on around it that ain't hot either. The big twist is Guile Hideout is Archie. We just saw this guy. The Fire Red and Leaf Green chapters ain't that long. It does have some cool payoffs though. I love his extremely angry little Surskit, and the eventual finale where he summons a giant energy monster is exciting, especially when all 10 Pokédex holders finally come together to stop it. I do have to question using this as a big wrap-up, not only for all the Generation 3 storylines like Aqua and Magma and the petrified characters from the end of Fire Red and Leaf Green, but also largely for these whole first 3 generations, as these characters appear less and less from here and the stories kind of shift into being a standalone chapters with some minor crossover elements. A lot of the screen time is also used to set up Diamond and Pearl, with Archie specifically working with members of Team Galactic on his plan, rather than just wrapping things up clearly, especially given how rushed and crammed in even the great parts of Emerald feel. Emerald fails a balancing act by turning what could have been 30 strong chapters either of the Frontier or the Jirachi storyline and the Generation 3 wrap-up, instead doing all three while doing justice to none of them. With more focus and being a little looser with action during the Frontier, Emerald could have been much stronger than it ended up being. There's plenty to love here, including our aloof asshole protagonist, but the story feels like it's just drawing in too many directions to its own detriment. Emerald has another adaptation too, the extremely generically named Pokemon Battle Frontier. I can't find it. It's not on Mangadex, and given its extremely generic name, it's hard to search for. Some of the author's other Pokemon manga are online, but not this one. They even had an official English release, and Bulbapedia has a small handful of images related to it, but I just couldn't find it, so I didn't read it. While a lot of Hoenn's issues are so deeply rooted that Emerald can't patch them up, namely that back half and all the water, it undeniably feels like a definitive edition more so than Blue, Yellow, and Crystal were. I don't love the Battle Frontier, or more so don't have time because I need to end this video eventually, but I can definitely see the appeal of a first step to making the series competitive, and I think most of the facilities are at least interesting twists on the game, not you, Palace. Just de-exclusiving the legendaries already makes the game more appealing, but the higher difficulty in general, focus on double battling, and handful of extra dungeons, plus the gym leader rematches and other bonuses, give it a cool flavor of its own. No game after this really capitalizes on doubles. If anything, it gets less and less despite the primary competitive format and the popularity of the competitive growing more and more, and way more Pokemon and mechanics down the line being made and balanced around the doubles formats. It's just neat to be able to play with double strategies given how neglected they often feel in the rest of the series. While the new dungeons and areas aren't the most exciting and are largely locked to the post-game, the inclusion of Ditto and the fact that any of the returning Pokemon are potentially usable in the Frontier makes it pretty exciting. The story is still a mess, maybe slightly less so, but the climax is way more exciting, so at least some of it pays off. More so than the other third versions, Emerald feels like a replacement for its originals. A hard mode remix with some more complex teams and strategies, a focus on double battling, both legendaries, more content, an elaborate endgame challenge, maybe too elaborate, the introduction of gym leader rematches which leads to more doubles content. It feels like a world with Emerald is one where there's very little reason to return to Ruby or Sapphire for the most part. I still have a lot of mixed feelings about Hoenn, its flaws are pretty readily apparent, but Emerald is as good as it gets, a great game held back by the world it's put in to some extent.